The ancient world did not leave behind a complete story. It left fragments scattered across the earth. A colossal wall with no clear beginning. A doorway cut into a mountain. Foundations buried beneath structures built centuries later. Symbols repeated in stone after the language that gave them meaning had disappeared. Each fragment belongs to a world that once made perfect sense to the people living within it, but that certainty vanished with them. Centuries of research have restored names, dates, and pieces of forgotten history, yet some places become more intriguing the closer we examine them. Beneath familiar ruins are older layers, unexpected chambers, and traces of ideas we are still learning to understand. Today, we follow those fragments into the ancient past, where every answer has the potential to uncover an even greater mystery. In Sevastopol, Crimea, the modern city overlaps the remains of ancient Chersonesus Taurica and a far larger engineered landscape extending across the Heraclean Peninsula. What survives above ground is only part of a system of streets, farms, walls, and agricultural installations that once organized thousands of hectares of land. The scale of that landscape became clearer through excavation, field survey, and aerial investigation. Archaeologists recognized that the familiar ruins of the Greek city were connected to an extensive agricultural territory, or chora, established mainly from the 4th century BCE onward. UNESCO documentation describes approximately 400 ancient land allotments distributed across roughly 10,000 hectares. Many traces have survived as stone boundaries, roads, farmsteads, planting structures, and buried foundations, although later construction around Sevastopol has fragmented parts of the original pattern. What makes Chersonesus unusual is that its engineering did not stop at the city walls. The urban settlement itself followed a strongly organized street plan, and related geometric principles extended outward into the countryside. Ancient surveyors divided an irregular limestone peninsula into parcels linked by roads and long stone alignments. The terrain was not naturally suited to perfect geometry. Slopes, exposed bedrock, shallow soils, and dry valleys interrupted the surface, yet substantial portions of the agricultural grid remained recognizable for more than 2,000 years. Simple surveying instruments, measuring chords, sighting poles, and standardized units could theoretically have produced such a layout, but the exact procedure used at Chersonesus is unknown. Archaeology preserves the geometry without preserving the instructions. We cannot reconstruct with certainty where the principal baselines were established, how errors accumulated over long distances, or how surveyors adjusted standardized parcels when straight boundaries encountered difficult terrain. Yet the most intriguing structures are not the farmhouses or roads, but thousands of surviving stone alignments that at first resemble ordinary property boundaries. Research on the chora has shown that many were connected directly with viticulture and land preparation. Instead of simply enclosing fields, the inhabitants constructed systems of planting walls and beds associated with vineyards. This changes the interpretation of the entire landscape, because these stones may represent components of a deliberately engineered agricultural environment, rather than passive markers separating one owner from another. The limestone terrain helps explain why such engineering was necessary. Much of the Heraclean Peninsula offered relatively thin soils over bedrock, conditions that forced farmers to modify the ground before intensive cultivation could become reliable. Stones removed from planting areas could be incorporated into walls and beds, while soil could be concentrated where vines were intended to grow. Walls running through fields could also influence erosion and the movement of surface water, slowing runoff on slopes and helping prevent valuable soil from being carried into lower ground. Their exposed stone surfaces would absorb solar energy during the day and release heat after sunset, potentially altering the immediate microclimate around nearby plants. A structure built from unwanted stone could therefore become a boundary, a soil management device, a drainage feature, and possibly a thermal regulator at the same time. The difficulty is determining how many of these effects were deliberately designed. A wall that reduces erosion does not prove that erosion control was its original purpose, just as heat stored by limestone does not prove that ancient farmers consciously constructed walls as thermal batteries. Archaeologists can examine orientation, soil accumulation, planting trenches, wall construction, slope, and relationships between neighboring parcels. But the agricultural system, developed over generations, and individual features could have acquired new functions. Chersonesus therefore presents a rare engineering problem in which the physical machine survives while its operating manual has disappeared. That machine was enormous, with roughly 10,000 hectares incorporated into the wider organized landscape. Even small improvements repeated across hundreds of allotments could have transformed agricultural productivity. Chersonesus became strongly associated with viticulture, and vineyard agriculture required more than planting vines and waiting for grapes. Farmers had to manage soil depth, moisture, drainage, planting intervals, access routes, storage, processing, and labor. The walls made these activities part of the architecture of the land itself. Instead of constructing one gigantic irrigation monument, the inhabitants may have achieved environmental control through thousands of relatively simple interventions distributed across the peninsula. Water makes this system even more difficult to reconstruct. The peninsula is cut by dry valleys, and rainfall is seasonal, so intensive cultivation could not ignore how water moved through the terrain. Archaeological evidence from Chersonesus includes wells, cisterns, and other water management installations, but reconstructing the hydrology of the entire ancient Quarry is much harder than explaining one cistern or one farmstead. If walls and planting beds slowed runoff and retained soil moisture, they could have functioned collectively as a decentralized water management network. The intriguing possibility is that there was no single hydraulic machine because the landscape itself had been converted into one. Rain falling across the peninsula would encounter cultivated plots, stone lines, modified soils, roads, depressions, and storage installations before leaving the agricultural zone. This raises another unresolved question: whether the grid and agricultural engineering were conceived together. The regularity of the Quarry suggests substantial planning, yet its final appearance could also represent several phases of adaptation. Surveyors may have established the initial property framework while generations of farmers gradually added planting walls, terraces, drainage modifications, and farm buildings according to local conditions. If so, the landscape visible to archaeologists today is not the product of one master plan, but the accumulated result of centuries of engineering decisions. Distinguishing the original 4th century BCE layout from later improvements is essential because the difference changes what Chersonesus represents. Either a remarkably coordinated agricultural project created from the beginning, or a geometric framework that slowly evolved into something far more sophisticated. The farmsteads embedded within this network add another layer. Excavated rural complexes contain spaces associated with residence, storage, and agricultural production, while some sites possessed substantial defensive architecture. Their position within carefully divided parcels suggests that the Quarry was not simply countryside surrounding a city, but a structured economic territory. Roads connected plots to settlements and coastal markets, while farms converted the engineered landscape into commodities, especially wine. The result was an infrastructure system in which surveying, agriculture, transportation, storage, and security were physically connected. Its precision is particularly striking because maintaining such a system required more than technical knowledge. Hundreds of parcels could remain geometrically meaningful only if measurements, boundaries, and access routes were socially recognized. Someone had to survey them, mark them, resolve disputes, maintain roads, and preserve divisions as ownership changed. Yet the administrative mechanism behind the physical grid is poorly preserved compared with the stones themselves. The landscape reveals that organized decisions were made, but not exactly who made them, how many specialists were involved, or how measurements were checked across such a large area. There is also evidence that the peninsula had been occupied before the Greek agricultural expansion. Bronze Age and early Iron Age remains show that Chersonesus was not imposed upon an entirely empty landscape. Later Greek agriculture, subsequent occupation, and the expansion of Sevastopol altered or covered earlier archaeological layers, making it difficult to determine how much of the pre-Greek environment influenced the later grid. Some ancient boundaries may have ignored previous land use, while others could have responded to routes, water sources, or terrain already understood by earlier communities. Today, this long transformation continues beneath and around Sevastopol. Development has obscured sections of the ancient territory, while preserved areas still display walls and parcel lines that can appear deceptively simple. Seen individually, they are rows of limestone. Seen together, they reveal something much larger, an attempt to reorganize an uneven peninsula into a productive landscape using geometry, stone, soil, water, and repeated standardized construction. Beneath central Sofia, Bulgaria, the Roman city of Serdica still survives under streets, government buildings, hotels, and public squares. What remains visible today may be only fragments of a much larger engineered city, whose underground systems continue beyond the limits of excavation. Serdica was never truly lost, but its buried scale became clearer as construction repeatedly exposed Roman remains beneath Sofia. Excavations around the Largo, the Western Gate, and other redevelopment sites uncovered paved streets, houses, public buildings, fortifications, water pipes, sewers, and parts of a massive amphitheater, revealing that the modern capital had grown directly over its ancient predecessor. The most intriguing engineering problem lies below the Roman streets. Serdica occupied an unusually favorable location in the Sofia Basin, where natural mineral springs emerge at temperatures of roughly 30 to more than 40 degrees Celsius. These springs were important enough to influence settlement in the area long before the medieval and modern city developed, and the Romans incorporated thermal water into an urban environment that also required ordinary freshwater and large-scale wastewater disposal. Archaeologists have found terracotta water pipes and brick-built drains beneath streets and buildings, including infrastructure associated with the main east-west road near the Western Gate. Yet because only separated sections of ancient Serdica can be excavated beneath Sofia, the complete hydraulic network has never been exposed. We can see individual components, but not the machine as a whole. That creates a difficult question. How did Serdica simultaneously control hot mineral water, ordinary freshwater, rainwater, and sewage without allowing the systems to interfere with one another? Roman hydraulic engineering elsewhere demonstrates that gravity-fed aqueducts, settling tanks, distribution structures, lead or ceramic pipes, street drains, and underground sewers could be combined into sophisticated networks. Serdica, however, added another variable, because thermal water was already rising naturally from underground. It had to be captured near its source, directed toward bathing facilities, maintained at useful temperatures, and eventually discharged, while drinking water had to remain separate from contaminated flows. Even modest errors in elevation could cause stagnant water, overflow, or reverse flow through drainage channels. The surviving archaeology suggests that elevation was fundamental. Roman streets in Serdica were constructed above drainage lines, allowing wastewater and storm runoff to move beneath circulation surfaces rather than through inhabited areas. Terracotta pipes could carry relatively clean water, while larger masonry channels handled drainage. The principle is understandable, but the exact organization remains uncertain because the known sections disappear beneath modern Sophia. A pipe entering an unexcavated block may have continued toward a fountain, bath, residence, reservoir, or distribution junction that is now inaccessible. A sewer leaving another excavated area may join a larger collector whose route has never been traced. Consequently, archaeologists can reconstruct portions of the network, while the location of many connections remains hypothetical. Thermal water makes this incomplete map even more important. Archaeological investigation near Sophia's mineral water catchment revealed a late antique bathing complex whose major construction phase has been placed in the second quarter of the 4th century AD, followed by modifications extending into the 6th century. The sequence indicates that Serdica's water infrastructure was not a single fixed design. It was rebuilt and adapted over generations. Earlier installations may have been removed, incorporated into later structures, or buried beneath them, making it difficult to determine how the first Roman engineers captured the springs and whether later builders continued using the same underground routes. Temperature would have created another engineering constraint. Hot mineral water could be valuable precisely because it arrived naturally heated, reducing the fuel required for bathing. But uncontrolled mixing with cold water would alter both temperature and flow. Conversely, wastewater from baths could contain sediment, oils, organic material, and mineral deposits, and therefore could not simply be allowed to contaminate freshwater lines. Roman builders did not need modern pumps to manage these systems. Carefully calculated gradients could provide continuous movement through gravity. The unresolved issue at Serdica is not whether Romans understood gravity-fed hydraulics, but exactly how that knowledge was applied across a city sitting directly above active mineral springs. This distinction matters because the underground infrastructure was tied to the street plan. Excavations have exposed paved Roman roads with drainage structures running alongside or beneath them, suggesting that streets functioned as engineering corridors as well as transportation routes. The western gate stood on the Decumanus Maximus, the principal east-west artery, and beneath this zone, archaeologists identified both ceramic water pipes and brick drainage channels. Such placement suggests that infrastructure was coordinated with the city's geometry. If major pipes and collectors followed principal roads, the visible sections may belong to a larger, organized network extending beneath entire blocks of present-day Sophia. Testing that possibility comprehensively would require access to areas occupied by functioning roads and buildings, precisely where large-scale excavation is most difficult. The same problem appears above the hydraulic network. Serdica's amphitheatre, discovered in fragments beneath modern construction, measured approximately 103 by 86 meters overall, with an arena around 61 by 44 meters. It was built roughly 250 meters outside the fortified city and occupied terrain previously used by an earlier theatre dating to around the late 2nd or early 3rd century. Instead of choosing untouched ground, later builders created a much larger entertainment structure in an area already shaped by earlier construction and by the natural slope east of the city. Portions of that slope could support seating, reducing the amount of artificial substructure required, while vaulted passages controlled movement through the complex. Yet here again, Sophia hides crucial evidence. The amphitheatre has not been uncovered as one complete monument, so its total seating arrangement, upper architecture, entrances, supporting structures, and relationship with earlier foundations must be reconstructed from incomplete remains. The earlier theatre beneath it raises another technical question. How much was demolished, how much was buried, and how much was deliberately reused? Roman builders frequently recycled masonry and incorporated existing foundations, but without exposing the entire footprint, it is impossible to determine the full engineering sequence at Serdica. Its fortifications reveal a similar history of modification rather than replacement. Defensive structures around the western gate include multiple construction phases extending from the Roman imperial period into late antiquity. Walls were strengthened, additional defensive lines were introduced, and towers of different geometries appeared as the military requirements of the city changed. By the 5th and early 6th centuries, Serdica had inherited centuries of streets, drains, buildings, gates, and water infrastructure. Strengthening the defences therefore meant inserting new structures into an urban system that could not simply be erased. Every new wall or tower had to coexist with routes of movement and, potentially, older underground utilities. This is why Serdica is more mysterious beneath Sophia than it would be as an isolated archaeological ruin. Archaeologists do not have an empty Roman city available for complete excavation. They have windows through a living capital. At the ancient Serdica complex alone, roughly 16,000 square meters preserve portions of streets, buildings, courtyards, water infrastructure, and drainage. But the ancient city extended far beyond that exposed zone. Roman roads vanish beneath later foundations. Drains continue toward areas that cannot be opened. Pipes terminate at excavation boundaries rather than at their original destinations. Walls pass underneath structures that still serve the modern city. Singidunum was never uncovered in a single excavation. It emerged piece by piece beneath Belgrade, Serbia, where construction work, rescue archaeology, and excavations around the Belgrade fortress repeatedly exposed Roman walls, streets, graves, water channels, and military buildings below the living city. The reason soon became clear. Modern Belgrade had grown directly over one of Rome's major settlements on the Danube frontier, positioned above the confluence of the Sava and Danube rivers. What survives is therefore not an isolated ruin, but fragments of an ancient urban system trapped beneath streets, buildings, utilities, and centuries of later fortifications. Roman Singidunum developed around a major military base occupied by Legio IV Flavia Felix. The legionary fortress covered roughly 20 hectares and measured approximately 560 to 570 meters along its longer dimension and around 330 to 380 meters across, while the associated civilian settlement eventually occupied an estimated 35 to 40 hectares. These figures reveal the scale of what lies beneath Belgrade, but they also expose the central archaeological problem. Only limited portions can be excavated, meaning researchers are attempting to reconstruct an entire Roman city from disconnected windows opened whenever modern development permits. Even its forum, the civic center that should have organized much of public life, has never been securely located. Among the most important clues to how this buried city functioned are sections of Roman water infrastructure discovered beneath modern Belgrade. Further remains of an ancient aqueduct were exposed during construction of an underground parking facility in 2023, alongside Roman burials and other archaeological material. The discovery confirmed that substantial waterworks extended through areas now occupied by the modern city, yet isolated sections do not reveal the complete engineering system. Archaeologists still lack a continuous route showing precisely where the principal supply originated, how it approached Singidunum, where its water was divided, and which branches supplied the fortress and civilian districts. This missing route matters because an aqueduct was not simply a stone channel carrying water downhill. A gravity-fed system had to maintain a controlled hydraulic gradient across kilometers of changing terrain. If the gradient became too shallow, flow slowed and sediment accumulated. If it became unnecessarily steep, higher velocities could increase erosion and complicate control of the water. Surveyors therefore had to connect a distant source with a destination at a usable elevation, while responding to valleys, ridges, unstable ground, and the requirements of the city itself. Roman engineers elsewhere used instruments such as the chorobates and dioptra to establish levels, but knowing their general surveying methods does not tell us exactly how Singidunum's engineers solved the local problem. That question becomes especially interesting because Belgrade occupies complex terrain above two major rivers. The fortress stands on elevated ground overlooking their confluence, while the Roman settlement extended beyond it at different elevations. Somewhere beneath the modern city, there must once have been a carefully planned relationship between source elevation, aqueduct gradient, storage, distribution, and drainage. Yet because long sections of the network remain inaccessible, researchers cannot reconstruct its full elevation profile. A surviving conduit may show the direction of flow at one point, but without the missing kilometers, it cannot reveal every adjustment made along the route. The engineering logic is still present underground, but much of the evidence needed to read it remains buried. The problem grows when the legionary fortress is considered. A 20-hectare base designed for a Roman legion represented a concentrated demand for water. Thousands of soldiers required drinking water, cooking facilities, washing areas, latrines, animals, workshops, and probably bathing installations. Water had to arrive reliably, then be distributed through a controlled network without compromising the defensive structure of the fortress. Yet the Roman castrum now lies beneath Calamegdon and successive medieval Ottoman and Habsburg defenses. Later builders repeatedly altered the same strategic hill, destroying some Roman remains, burying others, and occasionally incorporating older masonry into newer structures. Consequently, the internal water network of the legionary base cannot yet be reconstructed as a complete hydraulic system. One particularly revealing discovery was evidence for a valetudinarium, the military hospital associated with the fortress. Such a building adds another layer to the water question because a Roman military hospital required organized movement of people, supplies, and waste inside an already regimented base. However, only fragments of this environment are known. Without a complete plan, archaeologists cannot confidently determine how the hospital connected with water supply, drainage, nearby streets, or other service buildings. The mystery is therefore not whether Roman military engineers understood sanitation, but how these technologies were integrated at Singidunum, and how much of that infrastructure still survives beneath later construction. The same imbalance appears throughout the city. Evidence for incoming water is clearer than evidence for where all that water went afterward. A settlement covering tens of hectares could not continuously receive water without also controlling runoff and wastewater. Singidunum's topography offered an obvious advantage because terrain descended toward the Sava and Danube, making gravity drainage possible. But the complete sewer and drainage network has not been recovered. This leaves a crucial half of the hydraulic system largely invisible. Somewhere between the elevated fortress and the rivers, channels must have carried rainwater and used water away from occupied areas. Yet the routes, capacities, construction phases, and connections between military and civilian drainage remain fragmentary. Urban planning is equally difficult to reconstruct. Excavated Roman roads and buildings show consistent orientations in parts of Singidunum, suggesting deliberate organization linked to the fortress. But the street grid disappears beneath modern Belgrade almost as quickly as it appears. This prevents archaeologists from following roads far enough to determine how rigidly the plan was maintained as the settlement expanded. The unknown location of the Forum is especially significant. In a Roman city, the Forum was not an incidental open space, but a major organizing element surrounded by administrative, commercial, religious, and civic architecture. Singidunum reached municipal and later colonial status under Roman rule, yet the location of this central complex remains uncertain. A major component of the city's spatial geometry may therefore still exist beneath buildings that cannot simply be removed for excavation. Beyond the formal city lay another poorly understood component, the Canabae Legionis, the civilian community that developed around the military base. Merchants, craftspeople, families, suppliers, and workers associated with the legion would have required roads, workshops, storage areas, wells or piped water, drains, and connections to regional transport. Archaeological evidence indicates that this settlement extended toward the Sava side of the fortress, but much of it has effectively disappeared beneath later Belgrade. Until larger portions can be studied, researchers cannot determine exactly how military infrastructure and civilian infrastructure interacted, whether they shared parts of the same water network, or how resources were divided between them. Even the fortress itself preserves an incomplete technological history. The earliest Roman defensive phases are poorly preserved compared with later remains, while centuries of rebuilding changed the hill repeatedly. Archaeologists can identify elements such as the southeastern Porta Decumana and sections of the castrum, but reconstructing the transformation from earlier defenses into the massive stone fortress remains difficult. Each later construction phase removed evidence from the one beneath it. Singidunum is therefore a rare archaeological puzzle in which destruction and preservation occurred simultaneously. Later cities erased parts of Roman Belgrade, while sealing other parts safely underground. This is why the most intriguing technology at Singidunum is not a mysterious machine or an unknown material. It is the missing system that connected everything together. Archaeologists have pieces of an aqueduct but not its complete hydraulic profile, fragments of streets but not the entire urban grid, evidence for a legionary hospital but not all of its service infrastructure, a 20-hectare fortress without a complete internal utility map, and a civilian city of roughly 35 to 40 hectares whose central forum has yet to be securely identified. Every new excavation beneath Belgrade has the potential to connect two fragments that have remained separated for decades, yet the modern city simultaneously prevents the large-scale excavation that could reveal the complete plan. Rhodiapolis was never completely lost. Its ruins remained on a steep hill near modern Kumluca in Antalya province, southwestern Turkey, roughly 300 meters above sea level. But much of the ancient settlement survived beneath collapsed masonry, soil, vegetation, and centuries of later occupation. Archaeological surveys and systematic excavations beginning in the early 21st century gradually exposed a remarkably compact Lycian Roman city, and what appeared at first to be a conventional collection of theatres, baths, streets, tombs, and civic buildings soon revealed something far more unusual beneath them: an extensive system of terraces, vaulted substructures, drains, and water cisterns that had effectively become part of the city's foundations. The location made such engineering essential. Rhodiapolis occupied terrain where large areas of naturally level ground were scarce. Yet its inhabitants still constructed a theatre, agora, stoa, baths, temples, residential quarters, and monumental civic spaces within an exceptionally confined urban core. The theatre alone accommodated roughly 1,500 spectators, while its orchestra measured about 10.5 meters in diameter. Instead of forcing a rigid street grid onto the hill, builders adapted structures to different elevations, packing them together so tightly that relatively little usable space was wasted. This produced a city that has to be understood vertically as well as horizontally, because some of its most important infrastructure was not beside the buildings but underneath them. The most remarkable example is the water storage system. Rhodiapolis lacked the kind of abundant urban water source that could make a large settlement easy to maintain, so rainfall had to be captured and stored. Yet cisterns were not simply excavated reservoirs hidden wherever empty ground was available. Archaeological investigation indicates that some were incorporated directly into the terraces supporting the city. Their vaulted chambers stored water below, while simultaneously creating usable platforms above, turning the same volume of construction into both hydraulic infrastructure and structural support. In a settlement constrained by steep terrain, this solved two problems at once: where to keep water and where to find level ground on which to build. The palestra associated with the bath complex provides one of the clearest demonstrations of this principle. Archaeologists identified cistern structures beneath the exercise court, meaning that a large public space rested over hollow chambers intended to contain water. This arrangement required more than simply building a tank and covering it. The walls and vaults had to withstand the weight of masonry and people above, while also resisting the lateral forces created by stored water. Their internal surfaces had to limit leakage, and the entire structure had to remain sufficiently stable as water levels repeatedly rose and fell. A failure in one component could compromise both the reservoir and the public architecture supported by it. What remains uncertain is how these individual reservoirs functioned as a complete system. Roofs, courtyards, streets, and paved surfaces could all have acted as catchments, but erosion and later destruction have removed many of the channels that once connected them. Archaeologists can identify cistern chambers and portions of hydraulic installations, yet reconstructing exactly which surfaces supplied which reservoirs is considerably harder. Two openings documented near the bottom of one cistern have been interpreted as elements connected with water distribution, raising the possibility that at least some reservoirs were more than passive storage tanks. If water could leave through controlled outlets, it may have been directed toward neighboring buildings or other parts of the settlement, but too little of the connecting network survives to reconstruct the entire route with confidence. That uncertainty becomes more important when the scale of the city's water demand is considered. Public baths required water not only for pools but also for washing, cleaning, heating operations, and continual replacement of contaminated supplies. Houses needed domestic water, while fountains or other civic installations may have imposed additional demands. Rainfall arriving irregularly had therefore to be converted into a dependable reserve. The unanswered engineering question is not whether ancient builders understood cisterns. Such technology was widespread throughout the Mediterranean. The problem is determining how Rhodiapolis coordinated collection, storage, distribution, overflow, and wastewater within a settlement squeezed onto a steep hillside. Fragments of the bath drainage system provide another piece of that lost network. Archaeologists documented a wastewater channel emerging from beneath the frigidarium area and continuing along the southern side of the vestibule before passing beneath an entrance. Beyond this point, however, its course becomes uncertain because the surrounding urban area has not preserved the complete drainage route. The floors of parts of the tepidarium and caldarium also collapsed, destroying evidence that might have revealed how water moved through the heated rooms before entering the drains. The surviving channel demonstrates deliberate wastewater management, but it leaves an incomplete hydraulic map. Water can be followed out of the bath for a distance, then the infrastructure effectively disappears beneath the ancient settlement. Gravity should have made drainage easier on a hill, but it also created serious problems. Water descending too quickly can erode channels, undermine foundations, and concentrate runoff against retaining walls, while insufficient gradients allow sediment and waste to accumulate. Rhodiapolis therefore required builders to coordinate the natural slope with artificial terraces, streets, drains, and buildings constructed at different heights. Every new retaining structure potentially altered the path of surface water. The city was consequently not merely built on the hill, its architecture changed how water moved across the hill, forcing its engineers to create an artificial hydrological landscape whose complete geometry is now lost. The cisterns also complicate the structural picture. A solid terrace can simply resist the mass placed above it, but a hollow reservoir introduces voids beneath heavily used urban surfaces. Vault dimensions, wall thickness, masonry bonding, waterproof coatings, access openings, and drainage points all had to work together. If several such reservoirs occupied different levels of the settlement, the engineers also needed to prevent overflow from destabilizing lower structures. The surviving ruins show that the solution worked well enough for substantial portions of the city to function for centuries, but they preserve the finished architecture rather than the calculations, construction sequences, and maintenance procedures behind it. This is particularly striking because occupation at Rhodiapolis predates much of the Roman architecture visible today. Archaeological finds indicate activity reaching back to approximately the 8th century BCE, yet architecture securely reconstructing the earliest settlement remains much more elusive. The later Roman city therefore sits over a much longer history whose physical organization is only partly understood. It remains uncertain how much of the visible layout inherited earlier Lycian choices, and how much resulted from later rebuilding. Older terraces, pathways, drainage routes, or water installations may have influenced where subsequent monuments could be placed, meaning that some of the engineering logic beneath Roman Rhodiapolis could originate in phases that are now archaeologically difficult to separate. The lower settlement is especially important for solving this problem because the less monumental remains there include baths, cisterns, retaining structures, streets, and defensive elements connected to the practical operation of the city. These structures reveal a different Rhodiapolis from the one represented by its theatre and inscriptions. Beneath the public architecture was a network designed to manipulate slope, space, water, and structural load at the same time. A reservoir could become a foundation, its roof could become a public platform, a terrace could redirect runoff, and a street could function as part of the drainage landscape. Beneath Óbuda, on the western side of Budapest, Hungary, lies Aquincum, a Roman city whose surviving ruins represent only a fraction of what remains buried beneath the modern capital. Once a major settlement on the Danube frontier, Aquincum contained military installations, baths, workshops, aqueducts, heated buildings, and an urban population supported by surprisingly complex hydraulic engineering. Its buried world emerged gradually as Budapest expanded. Roman remains had been known for centuries, but systematic excavation accelerated during the 19th and 20th centuries as roads, factories, utilities, and new buildings cut through ancient layers. One discovery in 1931 was especially unusual. During construction of an electrical substation in Óbuda, workers exposed the cellar of a Roman building. where archaeologists recovered the crushed remains of an ancient musical machine. The object had apparently fallen into the cellar when the building above was destroyed by fire during the 3rd century CE. Among the debris were hundreds of metal components, including pipes, plates, fittings, and fragments belonging to a keyboard instrument. An inscribed bronze plaque provided something rarely available for an ancient machine: a precise historical connection. It recorded that Gaius Iulius Viatorinus had presented the instrument to the local collegium in 228 CE. The discovery became famous as the aquincum organ, one of the most important surviving examples associated with the Roman hydraulis, or water organ. Yet what makes it extraordinary is not simply that the machine existed. Archaeologists recovered enough of it to understand much of its construction, but not enough to remove every uncertainty about exactly how the original instrument worked. The surviving metal represents only part of the machine that musicians actually operated. Wood, leather, adhesives, seals, and other organic components deteriorated during nearly 17 centuries underground. Those missing materials were precisely the components likely to have connected moving parts, controlled airflow, and made the mechanism airtight. Researchers therefore faced a peculiar engineering puzzle. They possessed much of the durable hardware, but parts of the operating system had vanished. A Roman water organ did not produce sound from water itself. Air ultimately vibrated inside the pipes, as in other pipe organs. The difficult question is exactly what role water played in regulating that air in the aquincum instrument. In the traditional hydraulis principle, air supplied by pumps entered a chamber in which water helped stabilize pressure before the compressed air reached the wind chest and pipes. This could reduce the pressure fluctuations created by manual pumping and give the instrument a steadier supply of air. Ancient descriptions and related archaeological evidence established the general principle, but reconstructing the precise arrangement used in the aquincum machine is harder because crucial connecting components did not survive. Approximately 300 components have been associated with the find, and researchers have produced playable reconstructions based on their positions, dimensions, and comparisons with ancient descriptions. These experiments demonstrate that plausible versions of the mechanism can function. They do not, however, turn the reconstruction into a surviving blueprint. Small differences in valve placement, bellows design, water level, reservoir geometry, and pressure regulation could change how rapidly the instrument responded and how stable its notes remained. Even the technique used by the musician and assistants matters, because a pressure-regulated instrument is not merely a collection of pipes, but a dynamic system in which air supply and demand must remain balanced while different notes are played. That problem becomes more remarkable when the date is considered. In 228 CE, the instrument was operating in a frontier city hundreds of kilometers from Rome. Maintaining it required knowledge of metalworking, pipe dimensions, air seals, valves, and pressure control, together with enough practical experience to diagnose failures. The machine was therefore not an isolated curiosity. Its presence suggests a technical environment capable of supporting precision mechanical equipment far from the Mediterranean centers where hydraulic instruments had originated. The location of the discovery adds another layer. The organ was associated with the headquarters of the Collegium Centenariorum, an organization traditionally connected with civic duties that included firefighting. That does not prove that the instrument and firefighting equipment shared the same machinery, but it places the organ within a community familiar with the practical movement of water. Ancient mechanical traditions connected water lifting, pumps, and pneumatic devices through related principles of valves, cylinders, and pressure. Aquincum, therefore, preserves an unusual intersection between music and hydraulic engineering. although the exact technical knowledge possessed by the people who maintained the instrument was never written into the archaeological record. The same problem appears on a much larger scale in Aquincum's water infrastructure. Archaeological studies indicate that the city was supplied by an aqueduct extending roughly 4 to 5 kilometers from spring areas north of the settlement. At least 14 source points have been identified around the Romai area. Water was carried toward the civilian town and onward toward the military zone, supplying a settlement that depended on baths, fountains, households, and other facilities requiring a continuous flow. Sections of the aqueduct survived, but the complete distribution network did not. This is where Budapest itself becomes part of the mystery. Aquincum was not abandoned and preserved as an isolated archaeological landscape. Later occupation, construction, roads, and utilities repeatedly cut through the Roman city. The archaeological park visible today represents only portions of a much larger urban system. Pipes, reservoirs, drains, and distribution branches have survived unevenly, meaning that researchers must reconstruct the original network from disconnected pieces. We understand the Roman principles of gravity-fed water supply, yet the exact hydraulic map of Aquincum at different stages of its development remains incomplete. Maintaining a gradient over several kilometers required careful surveying. Too little fall could slow the water and encourage sediment accumulation. Excessive gradients could create destructive flow conditions or force engineers to dissipate energy. The surviving structures demonstrate that Roman builders solved these problems, but they do not preserve every surveying procedure or construction decision used along the original route. Aquincum, therefore, offers a distinction often lost in discussions of ancient technology. The basic engineering principles are understood, while the detailed implementation of a particular ancient system can remain partly inaccessible. Water then entered another sophisticated technological environment, the bath complexes and heated buildings. Aquincum used hypocaust systems in which floors were elevated on small masonry supports, allowing hot gases from furnaces to circulate underneath. In some buildings, heated air also moved through wall cavities. The physics is straightforward, but daily operation required judgment. Workers had to regulate fuel, airflow, and furnace output while maintaining different thermal conditions inside connected rooms. Archaeology preserves furnaces, channels, and raised floors far more readily than it preserves the operating knowledge of the people who controlled them. That lost knowledge matters because ancient infrastructure depended as much on human experience as on masonry. A badly operated hypocaust could waste enormous quantities of wood, create smoke problems, or damage structures through excessive heating. An aqueduct required cleaning and maintenance. A hydraulic organ depended on seals and carefully controlled air. None of these technologies was self-sustaining. Aquincum must therefore have supported specialists whose expertise connected systems that appear separate when excavated today. This may be the deeper engineering mystery beneath Budapest. Aquincum has left enough evidence to show what Roman technology could accomplish, yet much of the knowledge that made those systems reliable has disappeared. Archaeologists can trace sections of water channels, reconstruct heated floors, and assemble a playable approximation of an instrument built almost 18 centuries ago, but they cannot interview the technicians who knew how much pressure the organ required, when an aqueduct needed cleaning, how a valve should be adjusted, or how a furnace behaved after hours of continuous operation. Among all these remains, the organ from 228 CE captures the problem most clearly. It survived because fire destroyed the building and dropped its metal components into a cellar, accidentally protecting evidence that would otherwise probably have been recycled or lost. The catastrophe preserved the machine while simultaneously destroying many of the materials needed to explain it completely. What emerged in 1931 was therefore neither a complete Roman organ nor a meaningless pile of fragments, but something more intriguing, enough of an ancient machine to prove its sophistication, while leaving crucial parts of its operating logic to reconstruction. At the mouth of the Don River in Russia's Rostov region, archaeologists began systematically excavating Tanais in 1955, although the ruins had been identified and investigated much earlier in the 19th century. What emerged was a Greek-founded settlement established in the early 3rd century BCE at the northeastern edge of the ancient Mediterranean world, later occupied by populations connected with the Bosporan Kingdom and the surrounding steppe. Excavation revealed stone houses, streets, defensive walls, gates, ditches, and water installations, while geophysical surveys have continued to detect structures beyond the exposed ruins. The central fortified settlement measured roughly 240 by 250 meters, yet much of the archaeological landscape remains beneath soil and later occupation around the modern settlement of Nedvigovka. The most revealing discoveries are also among the least spectacular at first glance. Archaeologists working in houses dating mainly to the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE uncovered paved courtyards, channels and cisterns designed to collect water. These were not simply jars or isolated storage pits. Rain falling onto roofs and enclosed surfaces could be directed toward reservoirs within individual residential compounds, while other channels associated with streets carried excess water through the settlement and toward areas beyond the fortifications. Archaeological studies of Tanais have also identified a specially constructed installation connected with a natural water source. Taken together, the evidence suggests that the inhabitants relied on several water sources and several methods of controlling them rather than on a single monumental aqueduct. That arrangement creates one of the most important engineering questions at Tanais. A cistern works only if water can reliably reach it, and a drainage channel works only if its gradient remains sufficient to keep water moving. Multiply that problem across houses, courtyards, streets, and defensive structures, and what appears to be a collection of simple stone channels becomes a problem in urban hydrology. Builders had to understand the local topography well enough to determine where water would accumulate, which surfaces should direct it toward storage, and which routes should carry dangerous excess runoff away. Yet archaeologists possess only fragments of the network. Walls have disappeared, street surfaces were rebuilt, channels were modified, and different phases of occupation overlap. It is therefore difficult to determine whether Tanais once operated according to a coordinated hydraulic plan, or whether its water system evolved gradually as generations of inhabitants responded to recurring problems. The environment makes the question more difficult. Tanais stood near the Don Delta and the northeastern Sea of Azov, in a landscape shaped by river channels, sedimentation, seasonal precipitation, and changing water conditions. Archaeozoological evidence reinforces how dynamic this environment was. A study published in 2026 examining fish remains from Hellenistic and Roman Tanais identified freshwater and migratory species, including sturgeons, catfish, cyprinids, pike, and perch. Changes in the composition and size of these fish through archaeological layers provide evidence that the aquatic environment itself was changing. The people maintaining Tanais therefore had to manage water in a landscape that was not hydrologically static. This is where the streets become particularly significant. Excavations show an organized street network dividing residential blocks, and hydrotechnical remains indicate that some drainage installations were associated directly with these routes. Streets in an ancient settlement were not merely paths between buildings. Their surfaces could become channels during heavy rain. Even a small difference in elevation could determine whether water left the city or flooded a courtyard. If the surviving drains formed parts of a coordinated network, builders must have maintained usable gradients through an urban environment repeatedly altered by construction. But because only portions of the ancient surfaces survive, archaeologists cannot simply trace every channel from beginning to end. The unanswered question is not whether Tanais possessed drains, because the physical evidence demonstrates that it did, but how accurately the inhabitants coordinated drainage, collection, and street elevation across the settlement. The same problem becomes more complicated where water management met military engineering. Tanais was protected by walls and ditches, and excavations in the western sector exposed a substantial defensive complex that included a stone fortification wall, a fortified gateway, a ditch, and evidence for a timber and stone bridge crossing the ditch. The main fortified area was surrounded by defenses, while archaeological work has also identified an outer defensive line separated from the inner stone defenses by roughly 215 meters in some reconstructions. Such a system could not be planned independently of the terrain. A ditch alters runoff. A wall interrupts natural drainage. A gate creates a low and vulnerable passage through a defensive barrier, while a bridge has to transfer loads across ground deliberately excavated to obstruct movement. The timber and stone bridge is especially intriguing because most of the structure that once carried people, animals, and carts has vanished. Archaeologists can reconstruct its position from surviving remains, but not every detail of its superstructure or operation. The builders needed a crossing strong enough for regular traffic, while preserving the defensive value of the ditch and gateway. They also had to prevent erosion around foundations and approaches, particularly where rainwater moved toward the depressions surrounding the fortifications. What survives is therefore the footprint of an engineering solution rather than its complete mechanism. The missing timber components are precisely the parts that could reveal how loads were distributed and how easily the crossing could be repaired, removed, or controlled during an attack. Tanais presents another difficulty because the city visible archaeologically is not the product of a single construction campaign. Founded around the beginning of the 3rd century BCE, it experienced destruction, reconstruction, and major political changes. The settlement was destroyed during the campaigns associated with the Bosporan king Polemon around the end of the 1st century BCE and was subsequently rebuilt. Later Roman period occupation introduced additional phases before another major destruction in the 3rd century CE. Each rebuilding episode could preserve earlier infrastructure, modify it, or bury it beneath new floors and walls. A drain discovered beside a Roman period building may therefore follow a route influenced by an older street, while later builders may have inherited gradients established generations earlier without leaving any written explanation of how the original system had been surveyed. This layered history makes apparently ordinary measurements surprisingly important. If street levels were repeatedly raised, drainage outlets also had to remain below the surfaces they drained. If courtyards were rebuilt, their slopes still had to direct rainfall toward collection points rather than foundations. If fortifications expanded, runoff could no longer follow routes blocked by new walls or ditches. Maintaining a functioning settlement through centuries of reconstruction required continuous adjustment, yet no engineering manual from Tanais survives to explain how this knowledge was transmitted. Archaeology can identify the results, but reconstructing the sequence of decisions behind them is considerably harder. Even the full geometry of the defenses remains incomplete. Geophysical investigations conducted north of the western excavation have detected anomalies associated with areas where fortification structures are expected, allowing researchers to examine buried architecture without removing all of the overlying ground. This matters because excavation exposes only limited windows into a much larger settlement. A wall segment can look isolated until another buried segment is detected tens of meters away. A ditch can appear to end simply because its continuation lies outside the excavation trench. As more of this invisible plan is mapped, earlier interpretations of how the city controlled movement, water, and access may have to be revised. The deeper mystery of Tanais is therefore created not by a single inexplicable artifact, but by the relationship between systems whose surviving pieces are scattered across different archaeological layers. Cisterns demonstrate water storage, channels demonstrate controlled movement of water, streets provide potential drainage corridors, fortification ditches reshaped the terrain, while walls and gates forced builders to accommodate both water and traffic. The timber and stone bridge shows that even the defensive barrier had to remain integrated with the city's circulation network. Each component is understandable by itself, yet the complete engineering logic connecting them has largely disappeared. Philippopolis was never found in a single excavation. In Plovdiv, Bulgaria, pieces of the Roman city emerged gradually beneath streets, squares, basements, and construction sites, revealing that much of the ancient settlement still lies directly below the modern center. One of the clearest examples is the Roman Stadium, whose northern end was exposed beneath Jumaia Square, while additional seating discovered during excavations in 2005 to 2006 showed that substantial parts of the structure continued beneath later buildings. Built mainly in the 2nd century CE, the stadium was approximately 240 to 250 meters long and about 50 meters wide, with estimates suggesting that its seating could accommodate around 30,000 spectators. Yet only fragments can be seen today. Its long axis passes beneath the pedestrian center of Plovdiv, meaning that shops, streets, utilities, foundations, and later structures now occupy the ground above much of the ancient monument. This creates an unusual archaeological problem. The stadium is not simply ruined, but physically inaccessible over large areas. Excavations can expose isolated sections, but reconstructing the complete structure requires connecting evidence separated by buildings that cannot simply be removed. As a result, archaeologists know the approximate plan of the stadium, while significant details of its underground architecture remain dependent on limited excavation windows. Those hidden sections matter because the stadium was more than rows of stone seats surrounding a track. Excavations on its eastern side revealed that where the natural terrain could not support the required seating slope, the Romans constructed inclined, vaulted substructures beneath the cavea. These vaults carried the stone seating above, while creating the geometry required for thousands of spectators to see the arena. Roman vault construction itself is well understood, but Philippopolis presents a more specific engineering problem. The builders were working in irregular terrain between the hills of the city, where natural rock, artificial foundations, and differences in elevation had to become parts of one continuous structure. Since most of the supporting system cannot be excavated, it remains difficult to determine exactly how its design changed along the stadium, where the builders relied on bedrock, where they substituted masonry, and how loads were transferred through the transitions between the two. The problem becomes more interesting when the stadium is placed back into the landscape of Roman Philippopolis. The city developed around 3 prominent hills and became known in Roman times as Trimontium, the city of 3 hills. Monumental buildings therefore had to be fitted into sharply different elevations rather than imposed on a perfectly level site. The stadium occupied a natural depression between Sahat Tepe and Taksim Tepe, while the theatre exploited a hillside and the forum occupied lower ground. This arrangement suggests careful surveying before construction began. Roman surveyors possessed instruments and geometric methods capable of establishing straight lines, levels, and gradients, so there is no need to invoke an unknown technology. What is missing is the detailed engineering sequence used at Philippopolis itself. No surviving construction plan explains how surveyors coordinated these different elevations into a functioning urban system. Water makes that missing plan especially important. Philippopolis received fresh water through Roman aqueduct infrastructure, bringing supplies toward the city from the direction of the Rhodope Mountains. Gravity-driven aqueducts depend on controlled gradients. Too little fall can reduce flow, while excessive changes in elevation create different structural and hydraulic problems. The challenge did not end when water reached the edge of Philippopolis. It then had to be distributed through an inhabited city containing public buildings, fountains, baths, residential areas, streets, and districts at different elevations. Archaeological remains preserve portions of the supply system, but later occupation has destroyed, altered, or buried many of the connections that would reveal how the network functioned as a whole. A particularly important clue appeared beside the stadium, where archaeologists identified a brick-built cistern dating to approximately the 4th century CE. Its date is significant because the stadium had already existed for roughly 2 centuries. Philippopolis was therefore not operating with a single infrastructure plan frozen in time. New water installations were being inserted into a city already filled with monumental architecture. Engineers had to negotiate older foundations, streets, buildings, and underground structures while keeping water moving through the settlement. The surviving cistern demonstrates that this adaptation occurred, but the missing sections of the network prevent a complete reconstruction of how the reservoir connected with aqueduct branches and local distribution lines. Somewhere beneath modern Plovdiv, portions of those connections may still survive. The same problem appears around the forum. The central open area measured roughly 100 by 112 meters and was surrounded by colonnades, shops, administrative spaces, and major streets. Archaeologists have identified at least 4 broad construction phases extending from the 1st to the 4th century CE, evidence that the civic center was repeatedly modified rather than built once and left unchanged. Its marble-paved surface and surrounding architecture are visually impressive, but the less visible engineering may be more revealing. A paved public square covering thousands of square meters had to deal with rainfall, runoff from neighboring surfaces, changing street levels, and drainage around densely constructed buildings. Even small errors in gradient could concentrate water where large crowds and commercial activity were expected. Yet this is precisely the kind of infrastructure that later cities tend to erase. Drains can be cut by new foundations, reused as channels, blocked, rebuilt, or incorporated into later construction. Streets can rise as successive surfaces accumulate above older ones. Consequently, the monumental outline of the forum is easier to reconstruct than the complete hydraulic system that kept it usable. The surviving evidence shows an organized Roman center connected to the Cardo and Decumanus, but not every drain, junction, outlet, and change in elevation can be followed continuously beneath the modern city. What appears above ground as a collection of ruins was originally an interconnected system whose most functional components were often underground. A smaller building near the forum demonstrates how carefully the Romans engineered even spaces that held only a few hundred people. The Odeon, which also served civic functions, accommodated roughly 350 spectators. Beneath its seating were brick-vaulted structures supporting the cavea, together with galleries and stairways controlling movement through the building. Once again, the visible seats were only the upper surface of a much more complicated structural system. The stadium applied the same principle on a vastly larger scale. In both buildings, geometry had to coordinate seating angle, circulation, masonry loads, entrances, and foundations. This repetition suggests that Philippopolis depended on standardized Roman engineering knowledge, but each structure still required adaptation to its precise location. That adaptation is one reason the buried city remains difficult to reconstruct. Philippopolis existed for centuries, and its infrastructure changed with it. Streets were repaired, buildings replaced, water systems modified, and monumental spaces reorganized. Later Byzantine, medieval, Ottoman, and modern occupation added further layers above them. The result is not one Roman city preserved at a single moment, but a sequence of Roman cities occupying approximately the same ground. A wall exposed beneath a modern property may belong to one phase, while a nearby drain reflects another, and establishing how they once connected requires precise stratigraphic dating across excavation areas that may be separated by modern buildings. This is why discoveries beneath Plovdiv continue to alter the picture. The 2005 to 2006 exposure of additional stadium seating was important not because archaeologists had previously doubted the monument existed, but because it demonstrated how substantial Roman architecture could remain embedded inside the modern urban fabric. The same possibility applies to foundations, streets, drainage channels, water conduits, and other structures whose projected roots disappear beneath occupied properties. Archaeologists can infer their continuation from geometry and excavated fragments, but inference is not the same as physically exposing every connection. Philippopolis therefore presents a technological mystery without requiring the technology itself to be mysterious. Roman builders knew how to construct vaults, survey land, transport water, pave streets, and control drainage. The unresolved question is how those techniques were combined here, on this particular terrain, into one functioning city. A stadium approximately a quarter of a kilometer long had to fit between hills. Vaulted foundations had to compensate for uneven ground. Aqueduct water had to arrive at controlled elevations and then divide into a changing urban network. Public spaces measuring more than 10,000 square meters had to remain drained, while new infrastructure was repeatedly inserted among older buildings. Beneath the modern city of Mangalia on the western coast of the Black Sea lie the buried remains of Calatis, an ancient Greek colony where seawalls resisted salt for over 2 millennia, underground tunnels survived earthquakes, and harbour structures appear engineered far beyond what historians expected from a small Black Sea city. Calatis was founded around the 6th century BCE by Dorian Greeks from Heraclea Pontica. Systematic excavations began in the late 19th century, but the greatest discoveries emerged during the 20th and 21st centuries as archaeologists uncovered submerged harbour walls, underground catacombs, painted tombs, and massive defensive structures hidden beneath modern Mangalia. Sonar mapping and ground-penetrating radar later reveal that large sections of the city still remain underground and underwater. The greatest technological mystery of Calatis is its ancient coastal mortar. Even after nearly 2,000 years beside the Black Sea, an environment filled with salt, humidity, storms, and aggressive mineral corrosion, sections of the city's walls still remain standing. Modern engineers consider marine environments among the most destructive conditions for stone and concrete. Salt water penetrates microscopic pores, expands during temperature fluctuations, and slowly fractures structures from within. Even modern reinforced concrete often deteriorates after only 50 to 100 years near seawater, yet portions of Calatis survived for 20 centuries. Archaeological analysis revealed that the mortar used in some defensive walls contained lime mixed with unusually fine aggregates, traces of silica, and microscopic volcanic particles. This immediately shocked researchers because the Black Sea region lacks the abundant volcanic pozzolana used in famous Roman marine concrete. Roman ports such as Caesarea Maritima and Cosa relied heavily on volcanic ash imported from Italy to create hydraulic concrete capable of hardening underwater. But Calatis predates many of those Roman structures. This raises an extraordinary question. How did a relatively small Greek colony obtain or reproduce such advanced materials centuries earlier? Some researchers believe the builders imported volcanic materials through Black Sea trade networks stretching into Anatolia and the Aegean. Others argue the inhabitants may have discovered a local substitute using crushed ceramics, burned clay, or ash from industrial furnaces. Laboratory studies found evidence that some mortar samples developed crystalline bonding structures similar to those seen in Roman marine concrete today. These crystals are important because they slowly strengthen the material over time instead of weakening it. Modern Portland cement usually degrades in seawater, but certain ancient mixtures chemically evolved into more durable forms after contact with salt water. This phenomenon has fascinated material scientists for years because it suggests ancient builders accidentally developed forms of self-reinforcing concrete. The precision of the wall construction adds another mystery. Several surviving blocks fit so tightly that almost no space exists between them. This reduced seawater penetration and minimized structural stress during storms. Similar techniques appear in much larger engineering projects such as the harbour systems of Alexandria or later Roman breakwaters, yet Calatis was never considered an engineering centre on that scale. Some marine archaeologists now suspect Calatis possessed specialised knowledge of coastal construction adapted specifically for the violent Black Sea environment, one of the most unpredictable bodies of water in the ancient world. Beneath Calatis lies a hidden network of underground passages and chambers that still remains poorly understood. Modern geophysical surveys identified tunnels running 4 to 8 meters below the city, many constructed with surprisingly advanced vaulted ceilings capable of distributing weight and resisting collapse. The Black Sea region experiences frequent seismic activity. Ancient underground systems typically collapse over centuries due to shifting soil and water infiltration. Yet portions of Calatis' subterranean structures remained intact long after the surface city was destroyed or rebuilt. The purpose of these tunnels remains controversial. Some archaeologists believe they served as storage chambers for grain, wine, oil, and imported goods. Underground temperatures remain relatively stable year-round, creating natural refrigeration systems centuries before mechanical cooling existed. Others argue the tunnels had ritual functions connected to mystery cults and Orphic traditions known to exist in Greek Black Sea colonies. Several chambers appear too elaborate for ordinary storage. Some contain carefully shaped stone niches, hidden corridors, and ventilation shafts that seem designed for long-term underground activity. Comparisons are often made with the underground cities of Cappadocia in Turkey, although the systems at Calatis are much smaller. Still, the engineering logic is surprisingly similar. Stable airflow, thermal insulation, hidden entrances, and structural arches designed to resist seismic pressure. No definitive explanation has ever been agreed upon. Today, much of ancient Calatis lies underwater. Rising sea levels and coastal erosion gradually submerged sections of its harbour over centuries. But sonar scans beneath the Black Sea revealed something unexpected. Massive stone alignments resembling artificial breakwaters and engineered harbour platforms. Some blocks weigh several tons. More surprising is the precision of their placement. Certain sections appear interlocked in ways that minimized wave pressure and distributed force across entire walls. Modern engineers studying the site noted similarities with hydraulic harbour systems used by the Romans centuries later. This is difficult to explain because constructing maritime infrastructure in open water during the Hellenistic era was extraordinarily difficult. Ancient cranes had limited lifting capability, underwater visibility was poor, and stabilizing foundations in moving seawater required advanced planning. Yet the harbour of Calatis appears intentionally designed to manipulate wave energy. Computer simulations of Black Sea coastal currents suggest the harbour layout may have reduced direct storm impact by redirecting incoming wave force along angled stone barriers. If true, the builders understood coastal hydrodynamics at a level historians rarely associate with smaller Greek colonies. The Black Sea itself may explain why such technology developed here. Ancient sailors feared its sudden storms and violent winter waves. Greek records often describe the sea as unpredictable and deadly. A city dependent on maritime trade would have needed highly sophisticated coastal defences simply to survive. One of the most astonishing discoveries near Calatis was the painted Hypogeum tomb found near Mangalia. The underground structure contained wall paintings and pigments preserved far beyond what experts expected in a humid coastal environment. Normally, moisture destroys ancient pigments quickly. Salt crystallization causes plaster layers to crack and separate from walls. Yet red, blue and black pigments inside the tomb remained visible after more than 2,000 years underground. Microscopic analysis detected layered applications of mineral-based pigments combined with protective surface coatings. Some preservation characteristics resemble later Roman fresco technologies that supposedly became widespread centuries afterward. The tomb also featured carefully engineered humidity control. Narrow ventilation shafts appear positioned to reduce condensation while maintaining stable internal temperatures. Similar environmental engineering principles are seen in Egyptian tombs and certain Nabatean burial chambers, but their appearance in Calatis surprised researchers. The preservation was so unusual that some specialists described the chamber as a microclimate capsule designed to slow natural decay. Another overlooked mystery is the orientation of Calatis itself. Several roads and structures do not align naturally with the coastline. Instead, their angles correspond closely to specific solar positions during seasonal transitions. This has led some historians to compare Calatis with planned cities such as Alexandria or Priene, where astronomy influenced urban design. But in Calatis, the alignments may have served maritime purposes rather than purely religious ones. Researchers noticed that certain street orientations matched prevailing seasonal wind patterns across the western Black Sea. If intentional, this would suggest the city combined astronomy, navigation, and environmental engineering into a unified urban system. Such planning would have provided advantages for harbour visibility, smoke ventilation, sailing schedules, and even defensive signalling across the coast. What do you think is still hidden beneath Calatis? A lost harbour technology, underground engineering system, or evidence of knowledge far ahead of its time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The southwestern coast of Kerala, India, is home to a quiet archaeological site that may conceal the remains of one of the most important ports of the ancient world. Beneath layers of tropical soil, archaeologists uncovered evidence of a city connected to Rome, Egypt, Arabia, and Southeast Asia nearly 2,000 years ago. Yet despite years of excavation, many of its most advanced technologies remain poorly understood. If Patanum is indeed the legendary port of Muziris described in ancient texts, it raises an extraordinary question. How did a city at the edge of the Indian Ocean develop engineering, manufacturing, and trade systems sophisticated enough to rival some of the greatest commercial centres of antiquity? Systematic excavations began in 2007 under the Patanum Archaeological Research Project. What initially appeared to be a modest settlement soon revealed an astonishing quantity of artefacts. More than 100,000 artefacts have been recovered, including Roman amphorae, Mediterranean ceramics, glass beads, semi-precious stones, metal objects, brick structures, ring wells and evidence of industrial activity. Radiocarbon dating places major occupation between approximately 1000 BCE and 500 CE. The discoveries immediately attracted international attention because they matched descriptions of Muziris, the famous port mentioned in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea and Roman trade records. Yet every new discovery seemed to create even more mysteries. Ancient Roman sources describe Muziris as one of the busiest ports involved in trade between the Roman Empire and India. Roman historian Pliny the Elder complained that trade with India drained vast quantities of Roman gold. Some estimates suggest that millions of sesterces flowed eastward every year through Indian Ocean commerce. If Patanam was truly Muziris, then enormous amounts of cargo once passed through this region. Excavations have uncovered imported amphorae used for transporting wine and olive oil. Fragments of Mediterranean pottery have been identified. Beads, gemstones, and luxury goods indicate connections extending thousands of kilometers across the ancient world. Yet a major problem remains. Archaeologists have still not located the massive harbour infrastructure one would expect from a port of such importance. Where were the docks? Where were the shipyards? Where were the warehouses capable of handling international trade on such a scale? Some researchers suspect that centuries of river migration, flooding, and coastal change buried or destroyed the harbour. Others suggest that portions of the ancient port may now lie underwater. The paradox remains unresolved. Evidence of global commerce is abundant, but the infrastructure that made it possible remains largely invisible. One of the most surprising discoveries at Patanam involves water technology. Archaeologists uncovered numerous ring wells, drainage systems, brick-lined channels, and carefully designed water control structures. At first glance, these features appear simple. In reality, they reveal remarkable engineering knowledge. The region receives more than 3,000 millimeters of annual rainfall in some years, and heavy monsoon flooding would have posed constant threats to urban life. Maintaining stable water supplies while simultaneously preventing flooding required sophisticated planning. Many ring wells consist of stacked terracotta cylinders placed with impressive precision, and some descend several meters below ground level. Researchers continue debating their exact purpose. Were they water wells, filtration systems, sanitation structures, flood control mechanisms, or possibly all of the above? What makes the mystery even more intriguing is that similar technologies appeared centuries earlier in the Indus Valley civilization. Sites such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa possessed advanced drainage systems around 4,000 years ago. Did knowledge survive across millennia through cultural transmission, or did different societies independently develop similar engineering solutions? No definitive answer exists. Patanam participated in one of history's largest maritime trade networks. Goods moved between India, Egypt, the Roman Empire, Arabia, East Africa, and Southeast Asia. The distances involved were enormous. The voyage from the Red Sea to India's west coast exceeded 4,000 kilometers. Ancient sailors lacked GPS, radar, satellites, and modern navigation systems, yet they crossed open ocean with remarkable consistency. Historians believe navigators exploited seasonal monsoon winds. Greek sailor Hippolus is traditionally credited with recognizing these wind patterns during the 1st century BCE, although Indian sailors likely understood them much earlier. Even so, understanding monsoons alone does not fully explain the precision required. Successful voyages demanded detailed knowledge of currents, weather patterns, ship performance, cargo distribution, and celestial navigation. Almost none of the technical manuals behind this knowledge survive. The trade system existed, but the science that powered it has largely vanished. Among all of Patanam's technological puzzles, none may be more fascinating than its glass beads. thousands upon thousands of beads have been recovered from excavations. Some measure only a few millimeters in diameter, while others display colors, shapes, and manufacturing qualities that required extraordinary technical control. To modern observers, a tiny bead may seem insignificant. In reality, producing high-quality glass beads in antiquity was an exceptionally complex technological achievement. Glass production requires temperatures often exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. Craftsmen needed precise control over furnace conditions, fuel quality, airflow, cooling rates, and chemical composition. Even small variations could ruin an entire production batch. Chemical analyses indicate that some beads originated from distant regions, while others may have been manufactured locally. This raises a major archaeological mystery. If local production occurred, where are the industrial facilities responsible? Despite extensive excavations, evidence for large-scale bead manufacturing workshops remains surprisingly limited. Yet the quantity of beads suggests organized production rather than occasional craft activity. The technological challenges become even more impressive when examined closely. Ancient artisans needed to control silica content, alkali levels, and coloring agents. Certain shades of blue required copper compounds, while green glass often depended on iron impurities. Other colors demanded complex chemical recipes discovered through generations of experimentation. Without thermometers, laboratory instruments, or written chemical textbooks, ancient craftsmen somehow mastered processes involving molecular transformations inside high-temperature furnaces. Experimental archaeologists attempting to reproduce ancient glass technologies have discovered that success often depends on subtle variables that are difficult to control even today. A slight change in furnace atmosphere can alter color, a minor temperature fluctuation can affect transparency, and tiny differences in cooling rates can cause cracking. Yet the beads found at Patanum demonstrate remarkable consistency. This has led some researchers to propose that highly specialized artisans operated within organized production networks, supported by accumulated technical knowledge passed from generation to generation. The artifacts survive, but the manufacturing secrets do not. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how the beads were traded, but how the knowledge required to create them disappeared so completely. The discoveries at Patanam reveal far more than isolated craftsmanship. They point toward a highly organized urban economy. Imported ceramics, standardized artifacts, storage facilities, manufacturing debris, and trade goods suggest coordinated systems involving procurement, production, quality control, transportation, and distribution. Modern industrial centers depend on logistics networks, and ancient Patanam appears to have done the same. Yet, unlike modern cities, almost no written documentation survives. No business records explain inventory management, no manuals describe manufacturing procedures, and no administrative archives reveal how trade was regulated. The archaeological evidence demonstrates organization, but the organizational methods remain hidden. Perhaps the greatest mystery is how such an important center vanished. Historical and geological studies suggest that major flooding events transformed Kerala's river systems over time. One commonly discussed event occurred in 1341 CE, when catastrophic flooding may have altered channels, reshaped coastlines, and changed maritime access routes. If major waterways shifted, a harbour dependent on those waterways could have become unusable almost overnight. Trade routes would relocate, merchants would follow new ports, and economic activity would collapse. Over generations, memory itself could disappear. A city that once connected continents could become little more than a forgotten landscape beneath tropical vegetation. How much technological knowledge did the people of Patanum possess, and how much of it has been lost to history forever? Housesteads. Roman fort sits along the most dramatic section of Hadrian's Wall in northern England, nearly 300 metres above sea level on the basalt cliffs of the Windsill Escarpment. The fort was officially excavated in the early 1800s, but major archaeological investigations accelerated during the late 19th and 20th centuries when researchers uncovered barracks, hospitals, granaries, heating systems, drainage channels, and one of the best preserved Roman military latrines ever found. What shocked archaeologists was not simply the survival of the structures, but the level of engineering sophistication hidden inside a fortress built almost 1,900 years ago in one of the coldest and wettest frontiers of the Roman Empire. Unlike Mediterranean Roman cities protected by stable climates, housesteads endured freezing winters, violent Atlantic winds, acidic rainwater, and repeated frost expansion. Yet many of its drainage systems, stone foundations, and thermal structures still function better than some medieval constructions built over 1,000 years later. That contradiction became the beginning of one of Britain's greatest ancient engineering mysteries. Modern engineers describe the Windsill Ridge as an extremely difficult construction environment. The volcanic basalt beneath housesteads is incredibly hard but fractured by ancient geological stress. Combined with freeze-thaw cycles, the terrain constantly shifts microscopically over time. Normally, rigid masonry built on such terrain develops major cracks after centuries of thermal expansion. Yet many wall sections at housesteads remain remarkably stable. Excavations revealed that Roman engineers avoided creating completely rigid foundations. Instead, they layered stones of different sizes beneath major walls, allowing pressure and movement to disperse naturally through the structure. This resembles modern stress distribution engineering used in earthquake-resistant construction. What makes the mystery deeper is the precision involved. Some retaining walls were aligned at angles specifically designed to redirect rainwater runoff away from load-bearing sections. Researchers studying erosion patterns discovered that several drainage slopes differ by only a few degrees, suggesting Roman surveyors had advanced topographical measurement skills despite lacking modern instruments. Compared to medieval castles built in Britain more than 1,000 years later, housesteads shows far superior long-term water management. Many Norman fortifications suffered major foundational collapse within centuries, while sections of housesteads still stand after nearly 2 millennia. One of the most astonishing discoveries at housesteads was its communal latrine system. At first glance, it appears simple, rows of stone seats positioned above flowing water channels. But modern hydraulic engineers became fascinated when they realized how advanced the design actually was. The fort sat high above nearby water sources, yet Roman engineers created a gravity-fed system capable of continuously flushing waste downhill without mechanical pumps. Water entered through carefully calculated channels and maintained enough velocity to prevent sediment buildup while avoiding destructive turbulence. This is where the mystery begins. Northern England contains hard water rich in dissolved minerals, especially calcium carbonate. Over centuries, mineral deposits normally clog narrow drainage systems, but large portions of the housestead's channels remained operational for extraordinarily long periods. Some researchers believe Roman engineers understood flow dynamics far better than previously assumed. The channels appear slightly curved in critical sections, reducing stagnation zones where mineral accumulation normally occurs. Several drainage stones were also polished unusually smooth, decreasing friction and improving water velocity. The placement of the latrine itself adds another mystery. It was constructed near one of the windiest edges of the fort. Modern airflow simulations suggest the location naturally created a ventilation effect that continuously pulled odors away from occupied areas. In other words, The Romans may have unintentionally, or intentionally, created a passive air extraction system centuries before modern sanitation engineering. Even more surprising, traces of antibacterial minerals have been identified in some drainage sediments, raising questions about whether certain stone materials were deliberately selected to reduce contamination. Housesteads existed near the northern edge of the Roman world, where winter temperatures could regularly drop below freezing. Yet excavations uncovered evidence of heated baths, warm living quarters, and underfloor heating systems known as hypercausts. The Romans built hollow spaces beneath floors supported by stone pillars. Furnaces pushed hot air beneath the rooms and through hollow wall channels, effectively turning entire buildings into giant radiators. But archaeologists encountered several anomalies. The fuel consumption estimates do not fully match the thermal performance implied by the surviving structures. According to some reconstructions, maintaining consistent temperatures in such extreme conditions should have required enormous quantities of wood every day. Yet carbon residue inside some heating channels appears surprisingly low. This has led to multiple theories. Some researchers believe Roman engineers optimized airflow using pressure differentials created by the fort's elevation and prevailing winds. Others suspect the buildings were insulated more effectively than previously thought, possibly through layered plaster mixtures containing lime and volcanic additives. Thermal modeling conducted on reconstructed Roman bath systems has shown efficiency levels far higher than expected for ancient technology. In certain conditions, the hypercaust design distributed heat more evenly than some early industrial-era heating systems from the 18th century. Another mystery involves moisture control. Heated rooms normally create condensation damage in cold climates, especially in stone buildings. Yet portions of housesteads display far less internal erosion than expected. This suggests the Romans may have mastered passive humidity regulation techniques that are still poorly understood. Housesteads was not isolated. It functioned as one node in a defensive network stretching roughly 117 kilometers across northern Britain. What fascinates historians is the precision with which Roman forts and watchtowers were positioned. Many maintain direct lines of sight across enormous distances, despite difficult terrain filled with hills, valleys, and cliffs. Modern visibility studies using digital terrain mapping suggest signals from housesteads could potentially travel across multiple forts within minutes using fire or reflective devices. That level of coordination would have allowed Roman commanders to move information faster than many medieval kingdoms centuries later. The real puzzle is how Roman surveyors achieved such accuracy. Without satellites, aerial mapping, or laser equipment, Roman engineers somehow calculated optimal sight lines across vast landscapes. Small alignment errors would have broken the communication chain entirely. Yet the system functioned across one of Britain's harshest regions. Some archaeologists argue Roman military surveyors possessed highly advanced geometric methods, now poorly documented in surviving texts. Others believe they developed practical observational techniques through generations of military engineering experience, lost after the collapse of the empire. The network's efficiency becomes even more impressive when compared with later medieval warning systems, many of which suffered severe visibility failures due to inaccurate placement. A permanent garrison of hundreds of soldiers required enormous quantities of fresh water every day for drinking, cooking, cleaning, bathing, and sanitation. Maintaining such a supply atop a rocky ridge appears almost impossible. Yet housesteads survived for centuries. Archaeologists discovered sophisticated rainwater collection systems connected to reservoirs and stone-lined channels. Tiny gradient adjustments directed runoff into storage basins while minimizing erosion. Some gradients differ by less than 2 degrees, requiring remarkable surveying precision. More mysterious still are traces of waterproof mortar coatings found inside certain reservoirs. Chemical analysis revealed mixtures of lime, crushed ceramics, and mineral additives similar to hydraulic concretes used in Roman harbours around the Mediterranean. That discovery shocked researchers because such advanced waterproofing technologies were not expected at a remote frontier outpost thousands of kilometres from Rome itself. Comparisons with many medieval British forts reveal a dramatic difference. Numerous later castles struggled with contaminated or seasonal water supplies, while housesteads maintained a relatively stable hydraulic infrastructure under far harsher conditions. Southern Saudi Arabia, near modern-day Najran. Beneath the desert lies Al-Ukhdud, an ancient city whose ruins have survived for more than 15 centuries. Massive stone walls, sophisticated urban planning, mysterious inscriptions, and evidence of advanced manufacturing suggest that this was far more than a simple desert settlement. The city is famous for its connection to ancient historical accounts, but archaeologists have become increasingly fascinated by something else: the remarkable technological capabilities of the people who lived here. Many of the engineering methods that allowed Al-Ukhdud to flourish remain poorly understood today. Although local inhabitants had long known of the ruins, systematic archaeological excavations began during the 20th century. Researchers uncovered defensive walls, residential districts, workshops, inscriptions, coins, pottery, metal objects, and evidence of large-scale production activities. What emerged was not an isolated outpost, but a major urban centre, positioned along important trade routes linking southern Arabia with the wider ancient world. Each excavation revealed new evidence of technical sophistication and new mysteries. One of the first puzzles concerns construction itself. Al-Ukhdud was built largely from granite and other hard stone materials. Granite ranks approximately 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale and remains one of the most difficult natural stones to shape without advanced tools. Yet many surviving structures display surprisingly regular masonry. The challenge becomes even greater when considering the environment. Average summer temperatures in the region frequently exceed 40 degrees Celsius. Transporting multi-ton stone blocks across such terrain would have required careful organization, manpower, and engineering planning. The mystery is not simply how the stones were cut. The mystery is how an entire urban landscape was constructed and maintained under such demanding environmental conditions. Comparable questions have been raised at Petra in Jordan and Madain Salih in northwestern Arabia, where ancient builders achieved astonishing stoneworking precision without modern machinery. Al-Ukhdud appears to belong to that same category of engineering mystery. No large city can survive in an arid environment without reliable water. This simple fact creates one of Al-Ukhdud's greatest unanswered questions. Ancient settlements throughout Arabia developed sophisticated methods of water collection, storage, and distribution. The famous Marib Dam in Yemen demonstrates that Arabian engineers could manipulate water resources on a massive scale more than 2,000 years ago. Al-Ukhdud almost certainly depended on comparable hydraulic knowledge, yet much of the original infrastructure has disappeared. Archaeologists know the city supported a substantial population, no agricultural activity existed nearby, and no trade caravans passed through the region. All of these activities required significant water resources. How those resources were collected, preserved, and distributed remains only partially understood. The missing hydraulic system may represent one of the greatest technological losses associated with the site. Of all Al-Ukhdud's technological puzzles, none may be more fascinating than its metallurgy. Excavations have uncovered iron tools, metal objects, manufacturing debris, workshop remains, and evidence suggesting that metalworking was an important component of the local economy. At first glance, ancient metallurgy may seem straightforward. In reality, it represents one of the most difficult technological achievements in human history. Producing usable iron requires temperatures approaching 1,150 to 1,250 degrees Celsius. Achieving such conditions without modern furnaces demands extraordinary control over airflow, fuel quality, furnace geometry, and ore selection. Even small variations can drastically alter the final product. What astonishes researchers is that ancient metal workers repeatedly achieved these results with remarkable consistency. Consider the challenge. Modern industrial furnaces use sensors, thermometers, automated airflow systems, and precise chemical monitoring. Ancient craftsmen possessed none of these tools, yet they somehow learned to recognize optimal temperatures through observation alone. They could judge furnace performance by flame color, sound, smoke characteristics, and accumulated experience. Experimental archaeologists attempting to recreate ancient furnaces have discovered that success often depends on subtle factors invisible to inexperienced observers. A furnace that appears simple from the outside may conceal highly sophisticated engineering principles. Airflow channels must be positioned correctly, bellows must deliver air at appropriate rates, fuel must be selected carefully, and ore composition must be understood. The entire process requires extensive practical knowledge. Evidence from Alokdud suggests that its craftsmen mastered these variables well enough to sustain production over long periods. How they acquired this expertise remains unclear. Was the knowledge passed down through generations of specialists? Did master craftsmen operate secret workshops? Were technological techniques imported through trade networks connecting Arabia to neighboring civilizations? No definitive answer exists. The mystery becomes even more intriguing when compared with other ancient metallurgical centers. Iron workers at Meroe in Sudan, the Hittite regions of Anatolia, and certain parts of ancient India developed remarkably advanced metalworking traditions. In some cases, researchers still struggle to fully explain how ancient craftsmen achieved consistent results using relatively simple equipment. Alokdud appears to belong to this same technological tradition. Its metalworkers may have possessed practical engineering knowledge far more sophisticated than historians once assumed. Metallurgy was only part of a larger production economy. Excavations reveal evidence of pottery manufacturing, stoneworking, jewelry production, and other craft activities. This raises an important question. How were these industries organized? Large-scale production requires logistics. Raw materials must be acquired, workshops must be supplied, skilled labor must be trained, and finished products must be distributed. Such systems resemble small industrial economies, yet almost no written records survive to explain how production was coordinated. The artifacts prove that manufacturing occurred, but the organizational methods behind that manufacturing have largely vanished. Thousands of inscriptions have been discovered throughout southern Arabia. Some provide valuable information about trade, politics, religion, and society. But many questions remain unanswered. Ancient cities depend on knowledge systems. Engineers require methods of teaching. Craftsmen require training. Builders require measurement standards. And administrators require record-keeping systems. The physical remains of Alokdud demonstrate that such knowledge once existed. The problem is that very little of it survives. Perhaps the final mystery is why Alokdud declined. The city occupied a strategic location, participated in regional trade, possessed manufacturing capabilities, and demonstrated significant engineering competence. Yet eventually it faded from prominence. Climate change, shifting trade routes, political instability, military conflict, and resource pressures have all been proposed as contributing factors. None fully explains the disappearance. Like many ancient cities, Alokdud seems to have lost not only its population, but also much of its accumulated technical knowledge. The workshops fell silent, the furnaces cooled, and the engineers vanished. Only the ruins remained. What do you think? Were the craftsmen of Alokdud simply masters of knowledge accumulated over generations? Or did they possess technological skills far more advanced than historians currently recognize? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Perched on a steep hill above the earthquake zones of Western Sumatra, Bawamataluo village has survived centuries of tropical storms, humidity, termites, and some of the strongest seismic activity on Earth. Modern engineers still debate how a pre-industrial island society built structures that behave like earthquake-resistant architecture centuries before modern structural science existed. Dutch colonial researchers documented Bawamataluo in the late 19th century, but large-scale anthropological and architectural studies only accelerated during the 20th century after scholars realized the village preserved one of the last surviving megalithic living cultures in Indonesia. After major earthquakes struck Sumatra in 2004 and 2005, engineers became even more interested because many traditional Nias houses survived surprisingly well compared to newer concrete buildings nearby. The most shocking mystery surrounding Bawamataluo is not the stone monuments, it is the houses. The traditional Omohada structures look ancient and fragile from the outside, yet many have survived repeated seismic events in one of the most tectonically dangerous regions on Earth. Sumatra lies near the Sunda megathrust, where the Indo-Australian plate pushes beneath the Eurasian plate. Some earthquakes in this region have exceeded magnitude 8.0. Modern seismic engineers studying Nias architecture discovered something astonishing. The houses do not behave like rigid buildings, they behave like flexible shock absorbers. Instead of fixed joints or heavy masonry walls, the structures rely on massive hardwood beams connected through interlocking wooden joints. During earthquakes, the buildings sway slightly rather than resisting movement directly. That flexibility dissipates seismic energy in ways surprisingly similar to modern base isolation systems used in skyscrapers and Japanese earthquake-resistant towers. Some support pillars are not buried deeply into the ground. Instead, they rest on carefully placed stones, reducing direct vibration transfer from the earth into the structure. This design also minimizes moisture damage in the tropical climate. Comparisons with modern reinforced concrete buildings in Indonesia after the 2005 Nias earthquake revealed a disturbing pattern. Many poorly reinforced concrete structures collapsed catastrophically, while some traditional wooden houses remained standing. Engineers noted that lighter structural mass combined with controlled flexibility may have given the ancient designs a major survival advantage. The geometry itself remains difficult to explain. The houses use sharply angled support systems beneath the floors, creating triangular load paths that distribute weight efficiently across the frame. In modern structural engineering, triangles are among the most stable load-bearing shapes. Yet the Nias builders developed these principles through observation and tradition, rather than mathematics or formal engineering science. Bawamataluo is filled with enormous stone chairs, ceremonial platforms, stairways, and monoliths weighing several tons. Some individual megaliths may weigh over 10 tons. The mystery is not simply how they were carved, the mystery is how they were moved uphill. The village stands more than 300 meters above sea level on elevated terrain. Nearby stone sources are not directly adjacent to the settlement. Transporting multi-ton stones through steep tropical landscapes without industrial machinery would have required extraordinary coordination. Researchers believe hundreds of workers may have used log rollers, ropes made from forest fibers, and synchronized pulling systems. But there are major problems with this explanation. Tropical rainfall makes slopes dangerously unstable. Friction alone would have made uphill movement extremely difficult. Some archaeologists compare the challenge to the transport problems seen at sites like Stonehenge or Nan Madol. However, Bawamataluo's environment may have been even harder because of intense humidity, mud, and steep terrain. Several stones also display unusually flat surfaces and balanced proportions. Although iron tools existed in parts of Indonesia, achieving such shaping precision with limited metallurgy remains a serious technical question. Some contact surfaces between stones are remarkably stable even after centuries of erosion and seismic activity. This may be the greatest mystery of all. In most tropical regions, exposed wood decays rapidly. Heat, humidity, fungi, termites, and insects normally destroy untreated timber within decades. Yet some wooden components in Bawamataluo have survived for more than a century, and certain structural traditions may extend back far longer. For conservation scientists, this survival borders on the unbelievable. The first explanation involves material selection. The Nias people used extremely dense tropical hardwoods, including species comparable to ironwood. Some of these woods are naturally resistant to insects because of their chemical composition and density, but material alone cannot fully explain the preservation. Researchers discovered another factor hidden inside the houses themselves: smoke. Traditional houses continuously expose their beams and ceilings to smoke from indoor hearths over generations. The smoke slowly dried the timber and deposited protective chemical compounds into the wood fibers. Over decades, this created a natural preservation system somewhat comparable to industrial wood treatment. Laboratory analysis of smoke-preserved timber in Southeast Asia has shown reduced fungal growth and lower insect penetration compared to untreated wood. Some scientists compare the process to the preservation effects seen in medieval European smokehouses, though the tropical conditions in Nias are far harsher. Humidity creates another paradox. Tropical climates normally cause wood to expand, contract, and crack repeatedly. Yet many structural joints in Bawamataluo remained functional for decades because the builders designed them to move slightly with environmental changes. Instead of forcing rigidity, the architecture anticipated movement. Modern architects now study these flexible joinery systems for sustainable tropical construction. Ironically, some ancient Nias techniques may outperform certain modern building methods in humid environments because they adapt to climate instead of resisting it. There are also unresolved mysteries regarding forestry knowledge. Oral traditions suggest builders selected trees during specific seasons, sometimes linked to lunar cycles. Similar beliefs existed in Japan, Scandinavia, and parts of the ancient Mediterranean, where builders claimed wood harvested during certain moon phases lasted longer. Modern science remains divided on whether lunar harvesting significantly affects timber durability. Yet some experiments have shown seasonal sap content changes can influence fungal resistance and drying behavior. If the Nias builders understood these patterns empirically, they possessed an environmental knowledge system far more advanced than outsiders once believed. The scale of the timber is equally astonishing. Some support beams measure several meters long and carry immense weight without modern steel reinforcement. In earthquake zones, large unsupported spans are normally dangerous. Yet the Nias structures balance flexibility and mass in ways many researchers still struggle to model completely. Compared to many modern tropical buildings that deteriorate within decades, some Bawamataluo structures lasted across generations using only organic materials, manual craftsmanship, and inherited engineering traditions. That raises a deeply uncomfortable question. Did ancient builders sometimes understand local environmental engineering better than modern industrial construction? The massive stone staircase leading into the village appears simple at first glance, but closer examination reveals a sophisticated drainage strategy hidden within the layout. North Sumatra receives enormous rainfall annually, often exceeding 2,500 millimeters in some regions. Water erosion should have destabilized the pathway centuries ago, yet many stone sections remain surprisingly intact. Researchers notice subtle slope angles and narrow drainage channels integrated into the staircase system. Water rarely accumulates heavily across the walking surfaces because the design redirects runoff efficiently downhill. This resembles principles found in ancient Roman drainage engineering and Incan mountain pathways. But unlike those civilizations, the Neos builders developed these systems in relative isolation on a remote island environment. The engineering may have been entirely observational, refined over generations through trial, disaster, and reconstruction. Do you think the people of Bawah-Wamataluo discovered engineering secrets modern civilization has partially forgotten? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Off the northern coast of Kenya, hidden among the islands of the Lamu archipelago, lie the ruins of Manda Island, an abandoned city that once stood at the center of one of the most sophisticated maritime civilizations in Africa. For nearly 1,000 years, its builders quarried coral from the sea, manufactured durable lime mortar, engineered freshwater systems on a saltwater island, and connected East Africa to trade networks stretching thousands of kilometers across the Indian Ocean. Yet many of the technologies that made this possible remain only partially understood today. The ruins of Manda became known through surveys and archaeological investigations conducted during the 20th century. Excavations revealed stone houses, mosques, wells, imported ceramics, coins, and evidence of extensive trade dating primarily between the 9th and 15th centuries. What initially appeared to be another Swahili settlement soon emerged as one of the oldest and most technologically intriguing urban centers on the East African coast. One of the first mysteries of Manda is its construction material. Unlike many ancient cities built from granite, sandstone, or limestone, Manda was largely constructed from coral stone. The builders extracted fossilized coral blocks from coastal reefs and transformed them into houses, mosques, courtyards, and defensive structures. At first glance, coral may seem like a weak material. In reality, it presents significant engineering challenges. Coral is porous, vulnerable to erosion, and difficult to shape consistently. Yet many walls at Manda survived centuries of tropical humidity, seasonal storms, salt exposure, and coastal winds. Archaeologists have identified structures with walls exceeding 0.5 meter in thickness, designed not only for stability but also for thermal regulation. The porous nature of coral helped reduce indoor temperatures in an environment where daytime temperatures often exceed 30 degrees Celsius. What remains uncertain is how builders achieved such consistency. Thousands of coral blocks had to be extracted, transported, shaped, and assembled with remarkable precision. No construction manuals survive, and no written instructions explain quarrying methods. The engineering knowledge appears to have vanished with the civilization itself. The achievement becomes even more impressive when compared to contemporary settlements elsewhere in East Africa, many of which continue to rely primarily on timber, mud, and thatch construction. Manda represented a completely different level of architectural sophistication. Perhaps the greatest technological mystery of Manda Island is not the stone itself, but the material that holds the stone together. Throughout the ruins, archaeologists have discovered mortar made from coral lime. This material was essential for constructing durable buildings, capable of surviving in one of the most aggressive environments imaginable. Producing lime is far from simple. To create lime mortar, coral must first be heated to temperatures approaching 800 to 1000 degrees Celsius. This process drives carbon dioxide from calcium carbonate and produces quicklime. The quicklime is then mixed with water to create hydrated lime before being transformed into mortar. The challenge is enormous. Maintaining temperatures near 1000 degrees Celsius requires precise control of fuel, airflow, furnace design, and burn duration. Modern lime production relies on carefully engineered kilns. The people of Manda achieved similar results using technologies that remain poorly documented. Even more mysterious is the durability of the final product. Many coral lime structures on the Swahili coast have survived for centuries despite constant exposure to salt-laden air. Engineers know that marine environments are among the most destructive settings for masonry. Salt crystals penetrate pores, expand, and gradually break materials apart. Yet some sections of ancient Swahili mortar continue to perform remarkably well. Researchers studying traditional Swahili construction have discovered that lime production often involved prolonged curing periods. Historical accounts suggest that lime paste could be stored and aged for months before use. Some mixtures may have included organic additives such as mangrove extracts, plant fibers, coconut products, or other local materials. The exact recipes remain uncertain. This creates an intriguing parallel with Roman concrete. Modern scientists continue to investigate why certain Roman harbour structures have survived for nearly 2,000 years. In a similar way, Manda's coral lime mortar may contain material properties and production techniques that are not fully understood. Experimental reconstructions have demonstrated that even small variations in burning temperature, coral source, or curing time can dramatically alter mortar performance. Yet, ancient builders repeatedly achieved successful results without modern measuring instruments. How did they determine optimal firing conditions? How did they evaluate material quality? How did they develop formulas capable of resisting centuries of coastal weathering? The ruins offer evidence of success, but the process itself remains largely hidden. Manda Island presents another engineering puzzle. The settlement flourished on a coastal island surrounded by salt water. Maintaining a large population under such conditions requires reliable freshwater supplies. Archaeologists have identified numerous wells, cisterns, and water management features throughout the site. Some wells were carefully positioned to access freshwater lenses floating above denser seawater beneath the island. Today, hydrogeologists understand this phenomenon scientifically. Fresh water, being less dense than salt water, can form a floating lens within porous island sediments. However, exploiting such a resource without contamination requires considerable practical knowledge. If wells are dug too deep, saltwater intrusion occurs. If extraction exceeds recharge rates, the freshwater lens collapses. If construction is poor, contamination becomes unavoidable. Yet Manda supported urban life for centuries. The builders apparently understood local hydrogeology well enough to maintain sustainable water access long before modern groundwater science existed. Excavations have uncovered imported ceramics from China, Persian pottery, glass beads from the Middle East, and coins originating far beyond East Africa. These artifacts reveal participation in one of the world's largest trade systems. During the medieval period, the Indian Ocean functioned much like the Silk Road. Seasonal monsoon winds allowed ships to travel between East Africa, Arabia, Persia, India, and Southeast Asia. The scale of navigation involved is astonishing. A voyage from the Swahili coast to Western India could exceed 3,000 kilometers. Successful travel required understanding seasonal wind reversals, ocean currents, weather patterns, and celestial navigation. Unlike European sailors centuries later, Swahili navigators left few written technical descriptions. As a result, historians still debate how navigation knowledge was transmitted and maintained. Was it preserved through oral traditions, apprenticeships, specialized maritime guilds? The evidence demonstrates extraordinary capability, but the underlying system remains largely invisible. Manda was not a random collection of buildings. Archaeological surveys reveal organized neighborhoods, religious structures, public spaces and transportation corridors arranged according to practical urban principles. Mosques occupied important positions, residential compounds were carefully planned, water access points were integrated into the settlement, and trade activities were linked to the harbour. Such organisation implies coordinated planning rather than spontaneous growth. Yet no administrative records survive to explain who designed the city or how decisions were made. The urban layout suggests sophisticated governance, but the mechanisms behind that governance remain uncertain. Long before modern architects discussed sustainable design, the builders of Manda were already solving environmental challenges through engineering. Coral walls provided thermal mass, narrow streets generated shade, courtyards enhanced ventilation, and building orientation captured prevailing winds. Together, these features reduced indoor temperatures without mechanical cooling. Modern studies of traditional Swahili architecture have shown that passive cooling strategies can significantly improve thermal comfort in tropical climates. In some respects, the environmental design principles visible at Manda resemble concepts promoted by sustainable architects today. The difference is that Manda's builders developed these solutions centuries before air conditioning, computer simulations, or modern climate science. High in the mountains near Ayacucho, Peru, Huarihuilca still stands like a forgotten machine from a vanished empire. Long before the Inca rose across the Andes, the Wari were already building earthquake-resistant complexes, underground chambers, and astronomical alignments at nearly 2,700 meters above sea level. Some archaeologists now believe the Wari may have created the technological blueprint later perfected by the Inca themselves. The site was first systematically documented during 20th century archaeological surveys around the ancient Wari capital region. Excavations revealed ceremonial chambers, underground tombs, precision-cut stone walls, and urban planning unlike anything expected from an Andean civilization of the 7th to 10th centuries. Carbon dating placed major construction phases between roughly 600 and 1000 CE, during the height of the Wari Empire, centuries before Machu Picchu. What makes Huarihuilca extraordinary is not simply its age, but the engineering logic hidden inside the ruins. Nearly every structure appears designed for survival in one of the harshest geological environments on Earth. Peru sits directly along the Pacific Ring of Fire, where powerful earthquakes have repeatedly destroyed cities throughout history. Yet many Wari walls remain standing after nearly a millennium. Archaeologists discovered that some foundations were built using layered construction systems. Compacted soil, smaller stones, and larger outer blocks arranged to absorb seismic shock. Certain walls leaned slightly inward rather than standing perfectly vertical, a feature later famous in Inca architecture at Cusco and Sacsayhuaman. Modern structural engineers recognize this inward tilt as an effective way to reduce collapse during lateral ground movement. The mystery is timing. The Wari developed these techniques centuries before the Inca Empire reached its peak. Unlike Rome or China, they had no iron tools, no wheeled transport system for construction, and no draft animals capable of pulling multi-ton stones uphill. Yet they produced stone complexes capable of resisting seismic activity for nearly 1,000 years. Some researchers compare the Wari approach to primitive forms of dynamic load distribution, a concept used in modern earthquake engineering. Even more fascinating is the possibility that this knowledge came not from mathematics, but from centuries of direct observation and experimental reconstruction after repeated earthquakes. In other words, the Wari may have evolved engineering through long-term disaster adaptation, The stonework itself presents another puzzle. While not as perfectly interlocked as later Inca masonry, many blocks were shaped with surprising precision. Certain joints are so tight that inserting a knife blade between stones becomes difficult even today. Tool marks suggest abrasion techniques using harder minerals and sand slurry rather than metal chisels alone. Similar methods were used in parts of ancient Egypt, particularly during the shaping of granite blocks at Giza. Under several structures lies a network of narrow underground chambers connected by hidden passageways. Many are too confined for ordinary storage or habitation. Ventilation shafts appear intentionally placed to regulate airflow, and some chambers maintain remarkably stable temperatures compared to the extreme thermal swings outside. At high elevations in the Andes, daytime and nighttime temperatures can differ by over 20 degrees Celsius. Yet certain underground spaces remain comparatively stable year-round. Researchers believe the Wari may have exploited thermal inertia within stone and soil to create passive climate-controlled environments, an ancient form of environmental engineering. The exact purpose of these chambers remains debated. Some archaeologists interpret them as elite burial spaces, while others believe they served ceremonial functions connected to ancestor worship or altered states of consciousness. Acoustic testing inside similar Wari ceremonial structures has shown that narrow stone corridors can amplify echoes and distort voices in unsettling ways. This raises the possibility that ritual specialists deliberately used architecture to create psychological effects during ceremonies. Human remains discovered within the complex deepen the mystery further. Several burials showed remarkable preservation despite their age. Hair, woven textiles, and traces of skin survived in some cases for centuries. While the dry Andean climate played a role, researchers suspect the chamber placement itself may have been engineered to reduce humidity and maximize airflow. Textiles recovered from Wari sites across Peru demonstrate astonishing technical sophistication. Some fabrics contain thread counts exceeding 250 threads per inch, comparable to certain high-end modern textiles and finer than many medieval European fabrics produced centuries later. Dyes derived from minerals and plants remained vivid after nearly 1,000 years, suggesting advanced chemical understanding of pigments and fiber treatment. The Wari were not isolated builders. They controlled one of the earliest large-scale imperial systems in South America, stretching across vast portions of Peru through roads, administrative centers, and agricultural networks. Before the Inca road system ever connected the Andes, the Wari had already established routes through mountains, deserts, and valleys. Some roads associated with Wari expansion reveal multi-layered foundations engineered to resist seasonal erosion. Drainage channels diverted rainwater away from pathways, while retaining walls stabilized steep slopes. Comparisons with Roman roads are unavoidable. Both civilizations built infrastructure not merely for movement, but for long-term imperial control. Yet the greatest mystery surrounding Wari Wilcawain may not lie underground or within its walls, it may lie in the sky. Several structures appear aligned with the solar events, particularly solstices and equinoxes. Narrow openings allow sunlight to strike specific interior locations during precise moments of the year. In some chambers, sunlight enters only briefly, illuminating ritual spaces with almost unnatural accuracy. Archaeoastronomers studying Andean civilizations note that tracking the sun at high altitudes is both easier and more difficult than many assume. The thin atmosphere creates sharper solar visibility, but mountainous terrain complicates horizon calculations. To create reliable alignments, observers would likely need decades, possibly generations, of repeated measurements. At Wari Wilcawain, some alignments suggest intentional synchronization between architecture and seasonal cycles critical for agriculture, ritual calendars, and political authority. In the Andes, controlling knowledge of celestial timing meant controlling planting seasons, water management, and ceremonial legitimacy. The most controversial theory proposes that Wari priests used these solar events as engineered religious experiences. Imagine entering a dark underground chamber after hours of ritual preparation. Suddenly, for only a few minutes on a specific day each year, a beam of sunlight cuts through total darkness and illuminates a sacred object or burial chamber with impossible precision. To ancient observers, such an event would not appear scientific, it would appear divine. Similar effects existed in other ancient civilizations. At Abu Simbel in Egypt, sunlight penetrates the temple interior during specific days associated with Ramses II. At Newgrange in Ireland, winter solstice light enters a narrow passage built over 5,000 years ago. Chichen Itza in Mexico creates the illusion of a descending serpent during equinox sunsets. But Wari Wilkawain stands apart because far less is known about the civilization that built it. Unlike Egypt or Rome, the Wari left behind no extensive written records explaining their knowledge systems. Their astronomical understanding survives only through stone orientation, architectural geometry, and the shadows still moving silently across the ruins. Some researchers believe later Inca astronomy may have inherited Wari foundations. Others argue the Wari developed entirely independent systems, later absorbed into broader Andean traditions. The problem is evidence. Much of Wari intellectual history disappeared during political collapse around the 11th century. What do you think truly caused the collapse of the Wari civilization? Climate disaster, internal conflict, or the loss of knowledge over time? Share your theory in the comments below. Few abandoned buildings in Britain inspire more mystery than Denbigh's insane asylum. Long before modern hospitals relied on computers, sensors, air conditioning systems, and automated infrastructure, engineers in northern Wales created a self-contained institution capable of housing and supporting more than 1,500 patients and staff. Today, the massive ruins stand silent, their collapsing corridors attracting urban explorers and paranormal investigators. Yet the greatest mystery may not be the ghost stories, it may be the engineering. Located near the town of Denbigh in North Wales, the asylum opened in 1848 and eventually expanded into one of the largest psychiatric hospitals in Britain. Covering a vast area and operating almost like a small city, the institution required water systems, heating networks, ventilation infrastructure, food production, waste management, transportation logistics, and structural engineering on a scale rarely appreciated today. More than 175 years later, many aspects of how this enormous machine functioned remain surprisingly difficult to reconstruct. The ruins never disappeared. They remained visible throughout the 20th century after the hospital's closure in 1995. What changed was how researchers began to view the site. Initially, historians focused primarily on medical history. Archaeologists and preservation specialists later recognized something far more intriguing. Denbigh was not simply a hospital, it represented one of the largest surviving examples of Victorian institutional engineering. The main complex stretches across hundreds of meters of interconnected wards, administrative buildings, service corridors, utility systems, and support facilities. Historic records indicate that patient populations often exceeded 1,000 individuals. During peak periods, total occupancy, including staff, approached levels comparable to a small town. To understand the scale, consider this comparison. The average medieval castle housed only a few hundred permanent residents, and even many Roman forts contained fewer people than Denbigh supported on a daily basis. Yet Denbigh achieved this using 19th century technology. One of the least understood engineering achievements involves air circulation. Victorian doctors believed fresh air was essential for mental and physical health. Diseases such as tuberculosis were widespread, and poor ventilation was associated with illness. As a result, Denby's architects designed an elaborate airflow system throughout the structure. The corridors were unusually long, the ceilings exceptionally high, and the windows strategically positioned to maximize natural airflow. Internal shafts allowed warm air to rise through the building. Modern engineers recognize this as an application of the stack effect, in which warm air naturally moves upward, creating pressure differences that draw cooler air into lower levels. Today, skyscrapers use the same physical principle. What remains unclear is how effectively the system operated when the asylum housed over 1,000 people. Researchers examining surviving plans have discovered evidence of ventilation pathways hidden inside walls and roof spaces. However, many original records have been lost, making it difficult to reconstruct the complete network. Some experts believe Denbigh functioned as a giant passive climate control machine decades before modern environmental engineering became a formal discipline. Wales is not known for mild winters. Keeping thousands of rooms warm required enormous amounts of energy. Historical records indicate the institution operated large boiler systems that distributed heat throughout the complex. Steam and hot water networks extended beneath floors and through service tunnels. The challenge was not merely generating heat, it was distributing heat efficiently. Modern hospitals use computerized controls that continuously adjust temperatures, but Victorian engineers had no such technology. Yet they successfully maintained habitable conditions across a sprawling campus covering tens of thousands of square meters. Even today, engineers studying 19th century institutional buildings sometimes struggle to determine how temperatures were balanced between different wards. How are pressure levels regulated? How are heat losses minimized? How are failures prevented during severe winters? Many operational details disappeared when the hospital closed, taking practical knowledge with them. Beneath the visible structure lies another mystery. Like many large Victorian institutions, Denbigh contained an extensive network of service tunnels. These underground passages carried steam pipes, water lines, drainage systems, and maintenance routes. They allowed workers to move fuel and supplies while minimizing disruption above ground. Some sections remain inaccessible due to structural instability, while others have never been fully documented using modern survey techniques. This creates an unusual situation. Researchers can identify portions of the network, yet no one can state with complete confidence exactly how extensive the original system was. The tunnels raise a fascinating comparison with ancient engineering. Roman cities often concealed aqueducts and drainage channels beneath streets. Medieval castles incorporated hidden passages for defense and logistics. Denbigh appears to represent the Victorian version of the same concept, an invisible infrastructure network supporting a complex society above. Perhaps the most visible mystery is the survival of the building itself. Decades of abandonment have exposed the structure to rain, frost, vegetation, and vandalism. Roofs have collapsed, floors have deteriorated, yet substantial sections remain standing. Why? The answer appears to involve several engineering factors. Victorian bricks were often fired at high temperatures, producing exceptionally durable materials. Load-bearing walls distributed weight across massive structural elements. Arches redirected forces efficiently. Mortars were formulated for long-term performance. Some surviving walls continue to demonstrate remarkable stability despite losing portions of their supporting structures. Engineers studying historic buildings frequently encounter this paradox. Many 19th century structures exhibit lifespans that exceed modern expectations. The exact combination of craftsmanship, material quality, and construction methods responsible for this durability remains debated. Every city depends on water, and Denbigh was no exception. Supplying water for over 1,000 residents required careful planning. Drinking water, cooking, cleaning, sanitation, laundry services, and heating systems all depended on reliable distribution. Historical evidence suggests the institution maintained sophisticated water storage and drainage infrastructure. The challenge becomes clearer when viewed quantitatively. A modern hospital patient typically requires hundreds of litres of water per day when all operational needs are considered. Even conservative estimates suggest Denbigh may have processed hundreds of thousands of litres daily during peak operation. Without digital monitoring systems, maintaining such a network required remarkable technical competence. Much of the original infrastructure now lies buried, damaged, or inaccessible, leaving important questions unanswered. Perhaps the most unusual technological mystery involves the building's design philosophy. Victorian architects believed architecture itself could influence mental health. Natural light, open views, gardens, fresh air, and orderly environments were integrated into treatment strategies. Denbigh was carefully positioned to take advantage of surrounding landscapes. Large windows admitted sunlight, recreational grounds provided outdoor access, and internal layouts promoted supervision while preserving visual openness. Modern neuroscience increasingly recognizes that environmental design affects stress levels, recovery rates, and psychological well-being. This raises an intriguing possibility. Were 19th century designers intuitively applying principles that modern science is only now beginning to quantify? Aerial scans over Europe kept revealing the same strange pattern. Massive rectangular fortresses buried beneath forests, deserts, and farmland from Britain to Syria. These were Roman castrums, military camps supposedly built in days by marching legions nearly 2,000 years ago. Yet modern excavations uncovered engineering precision that seems impossible for temporary structures. Near modern-day Germany, archaeologists found drainage channels still carrying rainwater after centuries underground. In Romania, buried roads connected to fortress gates with near-perfect geometric alignment. In northern England, fort foundations survived repeated freeze-thaw cycles that destroyed later medieval structures nearby. The deeper researchers excavated, the stranger the technology appeared. Roman castrums were never meant to last forever. Historical texts described them as rapidly constructed military compounds designed for expansion, defense, and troop movement. Yet many surviving ruins display a level of engineering more comparable to planned modern infrastructure than ancient emergency camps. The mystery is not simply how the Romans built them, but how they repeated the same precision across 3 continents without engines, digital mapping, or industrial machinery. One of the first unexplained mysteries is geometric standardization. Archaeologists studying castrums from Spain to the Middle East discovered that many followed nearly identical layouts regardless of terrain. The main roads, called the Cardo and Decumanus, intersected at almost exact right angles. Gates aligned symmetrically with internal buildings. Barracks, granaries, baths, and defensive walls often followed mathematical ratios repeated across thousands of kilometers. What makes this extraordinary is the scale. The Roman Empire stretched over roughly 5 million square kilometers at its peak, yet frontier forts separated by deserts, mountains, and seas still show near identical engineering logic. Modern laser surveys at several sites revealed alignment errors sometimes smaller than a fraction of a degree. Even some modern construction projects struggle to maintain such consistency without advanced surveying equipment. The Romans supposedly relied on tools like the groma, a simple wooden surveying instrument using weighted cords. But many engineers argue these tools alone cannot fully explain the observed precision. Some researchers believe Roman military surveyors possessed advanced practical mathematics lost after the collapse of the empire. Others suspect they used astronomical positioning methods far more sophisticated than surviving Roman manuals describe. Compared to medieval fortifications, the difference becomes dramatic. Medieval castles often evolved chaotically over centuries depending on terrain and war demands. Roman castrums, however, resemble modular blueprints copied with almost industrial consistency. Satellite imagery has even uncovered buried fort outlines invisible from the ground, revealing hidden geometric systems beneath modern cities and farmland. Another major mystery involves Roman concrete and construction materials. Excavations at several castrum ruins uncovered foundations still structurally stable after nearly 2 millennia of earthquakes, frost, erosion, and warfare. Modern concrete often begins degrading within 50 to 100 years due to cracking, moisture infiltration, and chemical decay. Yet some Roman military foundations appear stronger today than when first constructed. Scientists analyzing Roman mortar discovered microscopic mineral crystals called aluminous tobermorite forming inside the material over time. These crystals slowly reinforce the structure through chemical reactions involving volcanic ash, lime, and moisture. In effect, parts of Roman concrete may heal themselves naturally. What confuses researchers is that this technology appears across distant military regions, including areas far from Italy's volcanic zones. Some frontier forts in Britain and Central Europe used mixtures with remarkable resistance to water and temperature changes despite lacking easy access to volcanic materials. This suggests Roman engineers either transported specialized ingredients over enormous distances or possessed regional formulas adapted to local geology. At some excavated sites, buried walls survived better than nearby medieval churches built more than 1,000 years later. In parts of Germany, Roman drainage foundations remain more stable than modern concrete repairs added during the 20th century. Engineers studying these ruins have openly admitted that certain long-term chemical processes inside Roman concrete are still not fully replicated by modern industry. Water management inside Roman castrums creates another engineering puzzle. Many ruins contain underground drainage systems with gradients so accurate that water still flows properly after excavation. Laser measurements in several forts revealed slope variations measured only in millimeters across long distances. That level of hydraulic precision becomes even more astonishing considering the terrain. Roman forts were often constructed on muddy plains, rocky hills, or unstable frontiers vulnerable to flooding. Yet the Romans consistently created underground channels capable of controlling runoff, sewage, and groundwater without pumps or powered machinery. Some castrums also included heated bath complexes using hypercore systems, networks of hollow floors and walls circulating hot air beneath rooms. These systems acted almost like primitive central heating. In colder regions such as Britain, archaeologists discovered evidence that some drainage and heating systems were adapted specifically to freezing climates. Comparisons with later European infrastructure raise uncomfortable questions. In some regions, medieval settlements abandoned Roman drainage networks because they no longer understood how to maintain them. Several ancient Roman roads and channels remained functional long after surrounding post-Roman infrastructure collapsed. The roads connecting these castrums may be even more mysterious than the forts themselves. Roman military highways crossed mountains, marshes, rivers, forests, and deserts with astonishing efficiency. Many were built using multiple structural layers: compacted earth, crushed stone, gravel, and elevated drainage surfaces. Some roads still survive today beneath modern highways because engineers discovered the Roman routes remained the most stable paths through difficult terrain. Archaeological evidence suggests Roman legions could march roughly 25 to 30 kilometers per day while carrying heavy equipment. Maintaining this logistical speed across thousands of kilometers required supply coordination on a scale that seems almost impossible for the ancient world. Certain frontier forts appear positioned at mathematically optimized intervals for signaling and reinforcement. Beacon towers allowed communication across long distances. Some researchers compare the Roman military network to an ancient analog version of modern logistical infrastructure. The mystery deepens when considering construction speed. Ancient writers claimed Roman soldiers could build fortified camps overnight during campaigns. That included trenches, wooden defences, watchtowers, roads, command structures, and organised internal layouts. Modern military engineers estimate that constructing comparable fortified compounds today would normally require mechanised excavation equipment and large logistical support systems. Even more puzzling is how much of this knowledge disappeared after the fall of Rome. Following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, Europe entered centuries where large-scale infrastructure quality sharply declined. Roads deteriorated, urban sanitation weakened. Massive stone engineering became rarer. In many regions, people literally dismantled Roman structures because reproducing them from scratch was too difficult or expensive. Some historians believe Roman engineering superiority came from centuries of accumulated experimentation inside the military. Legion engineers constantly adapted techniques for local climates, materials, and terrain. Others argue significant technical manuals and mathematical systems were permanently lost during the destruction of Roman libraries and administrative centres. The most controversial theories suggest Roman engineering may have been more advanced than surviving historical texts imply. Practical knowledge passed directly through military training may never have been fully documented. Certain construction techniques visible in castrum ruins were not equalled again until the Industrial Age. Do you think the Romans truly possessed lost engineering knowledge far ahead of their time? Or are modern historians still underestimating ancient technology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Just northwest of Seville, Spain, lies a Roman city where engineers solved problems that still challenge urban planners today. Beneath its ruined streets, giant amphitheatre, and magnificent mosaics lies evidence of technological knowledge that may have been centuries ahead of its time. Although local inhabitants had long known about the ruins, systematic archaeological investigations began during the 18th and 19th centuries. Excavations gradually revealed an enormous Roman city founded in 206 BC and expanded dramatically under Emperor Hadrian during the 2nd century AD. What archaeologists uncovered was not merely another Roman settlement. It was one of the most sophisticated urban engineering projects in the Western Roman Empire. One of Italica's first mysteries appears before examining a single building. The city seems far too large for its population. Archaeological estimates suggest that Italica may have housed between 8,000 and 15,000 inhabitants during its peak. Yet many of its public works were designed on a scale that appears suitable for a much larger urban centre. Its streets were unusually wide, residential districts occupied vast areas, and public spaces were monumental. Most striking of all was an amphitheatre capable of accommodating approximately 25,000 spectators. To understand how unusual this was, consider that many modern sports arenas are designed to serve populations significantly larger than the city itself. Italica appears to have followed a similar logic nearly 2,000 years ago. Why? Some historians believe Emperor Hadrian intended to transform his birthplace into a major administrative centre of Roman Hispania. Others suggest the city represented an ambitious political statement designed to rival Rome's most prestigious provincial capitals. Yet archaeological surveys indicate that, Portions of the planned expansion were never fully completed. Entire sections appear to have been prepared for development but remained underutilized. The result is a city that looks like a grand vision, frozen midway through execution. Roman engineers were famous for aqueducts, but Italica presents unusual questions even by Roman standards. The city required enormous quantities of water. Bath complexes, fountains, workshops, households, gardens, and public facilities all depended on a continuous supply. Archaeologists have uncovered reservoirs, distribution channels, underground conduits, and sophisticated drainage systems. Together, they formed an integrated hydraulic network stretching throughout the city. Modern hydraulic modelling suggests that maintaining stable water flow across such a network would have required careful calculations involving pressure, elevation, and storage capacity. The mystery is that important portions of the system have not survived. Researchers can identify the components, but reconstructing exactly how the entire network functioned remains difficult. Some engineers have proposed that Italica employed intermediate storage tanks that helped regulate pressure fluctuations, a principle still used in modern municipal water systems. If true, the city's designers possessed a practical understanding of hydraulic behavior far more advanced than many assume for the ancient world. Ancient cities often suffered from flooding, sewage accumulation, and stagnant water. Italica appears to have solved these problems remarkably well. Beneath the streets lies a network of underground drains whose gradients were carefully calculated to maintain flow while minimizing erosion. What makes this achievement remarkable is the precision required. A drainage tunnel extending hundreds of meters can fail if the slope is too steep or too shallow. Excessive gradients increase erosion, while insufficient gradients allow sediment to accumulate. Yet many sections of Italica's drainage infrastructure remained functional for centuries. The question is how Roman surveyors achieved such accuracy. There were no laser levels, no satellite positioning systems, and no digital mapping software. The primary surveying instruments available were simple optical devices such as the Groma and chorobates. Despite these limitations, the resulting infrastructure demonstrates a level of precision that continues to impress modern engineers. Recent studies of Roman urban planning have revealed that many cities were designed with environmental factors in mind. Italica may represent one of the clearest examples. The orientation of streets appears to encourage airflow through residential districts, while certain building layouts may have reduced solar heat accumulation during the hottest months of the year. Southern Spain regularly experiences summer temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius, making heat management essential for urban life. Computer simulations performed on comparable Roman cities have demonstrated that street orientation alone can significantly influence local temperature conditions. Even small changes in airflow can reduce thermal stress across densely populated districts. If Italica's layout intentionally exploited prevailing winds from the Guadalquivir Valley, its planners may have been applying principles similar to those used in modern climate-responsive urban design. The question remains whether this knowledge resulted from formal engineering theory or centuries of accumulated practical experience. Among all of Italica's technological puzzles, none may be more astonishing than its mosaics. At first glance, they appear purely artistic, but closer examination reveals something very different. Many of Italica's mosaic floors were constructed from hundreds of thousands of individual tesserae, small pieces of stone, marble, ceramic, and colored materials carefully cut and positioned by hand. The House of the Planetarium contains one of the most famous examples, its design depicting celestial symbolism through geometric arrangements of extraordinary complexity. What makes these mosaics remarkable is not merely their beauty, but their precision. Modern measurements show that many geometric patterns maintain alignment across large floor surfaces with surprisingly little deviation. Symmetrical figures remain balanced despite being assembled from countless individual components. Imagine constructing a giant image covering dozens of square meters while using pieces sometimes measuring only a few millimeters across. Now imagine doing so without lasers, digital templates, computer-aided design software, or modern measuring equipment. The challenge becomes even greater when considering optical correction. Researchers studying Roman mosaics have discovered that some designs appear to compensate for viewing angles and spatial distortions. Certain geometric arrangements look perfectly symmetrical to observers despite minor adjustments hidden within the pattern itself. This suggests that mosaic craftsmen understood visual perception at a sophisticated level. The mathematical planning required is extraordinary. Before placing a single tessera, artisans needed to calculate proportions, establish reference grids, maintain alignment, distribute colors, and coordinate thousands of individual placements. One mistake could disrupt an entire section, yet many Italica mosaics display a consistency that rivals modern architectural decoration. The mystery deepens when examining durability. Nearly 2,000 years later, numerous mosaic sections remain recognizable despite earthquakes, weathering, soil pressure, human activity, and centuries of neglect. The survival of these floors depended not only on artistic skill but also on engineering. Roman builders typically constructed mosaics atop multiple foundation layers. These layers distributed loads, reduced cracking, controlled moisture, and stabilized the surface. What remains uncertain is how craftsmen determined the optimal thickness and composition for these layers. No surviving technical manuals explain the process in sufficient detail. The finished masterpieces remain, but the engineering knowledge behind them has largely vanished. In many ways, Italica's mosaics resemble the Antikythera mechanism. Both reveal levels of sophistication that exceed what many people expect from the ancient world. Both demonstrate practical knowledge that was clearly real, and both leave modern researchers asking the same question: how much technical expertise has been lost? Italica's amphitheatre ranks among the largest in the Roman Empire. Its structure required massive earthworks, retaining systems, circulation corridors, stairways, foundations, and load-bearing walls. Thousands of spectators could enter, move through and exit the structure efficiently. Modern stadium engineers recognize this as a highly complex design challenge in which crowd movement, structural stability, visibility, and safety must all be balanced simultaneously. Yet Roman engineers achieved these goals nearly 2 millennia ago. Even more remarkable is the structure's longevity. Although partially ruined, significant portions remain standing after centuries of environmental stress. The original builders succeeded in creating a structure whose fundamental engineering principles continue to function long after the empire that built it disappeared. In the heart of northern Spain, roughly 10 kilometers west of Vitoria-Gasteiz in the Basque Country, lie the ruins of Iruna-Velaya, one of the largest Roman cities ever discovered in the region. Archaeologists have studied the site for decades, uncovering walls, houses, workshops, roads, and thousands of artifacts. Yet, despite years of excavation, Iruna-Velaya remains surrounded by mysteries that extend far beyond its famous controversies. What makes this site remarkable is not simply what archaeologists have found. It is what the discoveries reveal about engineering, urban planning, material science, and technological knowledge that appears far more sophisticated than many would expect from a provincial Roman settlement. The city raises a fascinating question. How did a community on the edge of the Roman Empire develop infrastructure and construction technologies that continued functioning for centuries, while much of the knowledge behind them eventually disappeared? Iruna Valea occupies a strategic plateau overlooking the Zadorra River in northern Spain. The location was ideal for controlling regional trade routes, connecting the Iberian interior with the northern coast. Archaeological investigations began in the 19th century, but large-scale excavations accelerated during the 20th and 21st centuries. Researchers eventually identified a settlement covering approximately 80 to 100 hectares, making it one of the most significant Roman urban centres in the Basque region. Excavations revealed an extensive network of roads, defensive walls, residential districts, industrial areas, and public buildings. Beneath the soil lay evidence of nearly 2,000 years of human activity. Yet the deeper archaeologists dug, the more questions emerged. The first mystery begins with the city's placement. Modern topographic studies show that the plateau provided natural defensive advantages, but constructing a large urban centre there required solving numerous engineering challenges. The terrain contained uneven elevations, drainage issues, and geological variations that could potentially destabilize major structures. Roman surveyors somehow transformed this landscape into a functioning city. Without satellites, aerial photography, GPS or laser scanning, they established road grids, building alignments, and infrastructure systems that remained operational for centuries. Modern archaeologists, using digital terrain models, have discovered that many major structures appear carefully positioned to maximize natural drainage while minimizing erosion risk. This level of environmental adaptation resembles planning strategies seen at Roman cities such as Pompeii and Augusta Emerita, suggesting that sophisticated surveying knowledge extended even to distant provincial settlements. Exactly how surveyors achieved such accuracy using only ancient instruments remains a subject of ongoing research. No ancient city could survive without water. This fact creates one of the greatest mysteries at Iruna Valea. Archaeologists have identified drainage channels, water management features, and evidence of distribution systems. However, much of the original hydraulic network has disappeared. Estimating the city's population is difficult, but even a settlement of several thousand inhabitants would have required enormous amounts of water every day. Modern studies suggest that Roman urban residents could consume anywhere from 50 to more than 200 litres of water per person daily, depending on local infrastructure. That means the city may have needed hundreds of thousands of litres of water every day. Where exactly did all that water originate? How was it transported? What gradients were used? How were seasonal fluctuations managed? The surviving evidence demonstrates that a sophisticated hydraulic system once existed, yet much of its design remains hidden beneath later deposits or has been lost entirely. This mirrors similar mysteries surrounding Roman water systems throughout Europe, where the infrastructure survives only in fragments while the engineering calculations themselves have vanished. One of the most impressive discoveries at Iruna Valea is its defensive wall system. During the later Roman period, massive fortifications were constructed around the city. Some sections reached several meters in thickness and incorporated enormous quantities of stone and mortar. What makes these walls remarkable is their durability. For nearly 2,000 years, they have endured winter freezing cycles, heavy rainfall, temperature fluctuations, biological weathering, and ground movement. Modern engineers understand many aspects of Roman construction, but certain questions remain unresolved. Why do some Roman walls survive far longer than many medieval structures? What exact mortar compositions were used? How did builders optimize load distribution without modern structural calculations? Laboratory studies of Roman mortars elsewhere in the empire have revealed complex chemical interactions involving lime, volcanic materials, and mineral reactions that can strengthen structures over time. Whether similar mechanisms contributed to the longevity of Iruna Valea's walls remains an active area of investigation. Every excavation season produces evidence of remarkable craftsmanship. Researchers have recovered ceramics, glass vessels, metal tools, building materials, and decorative elements. Many artifacts remain in surprisingly good condition despite spending centuries underground. This raises important technological questions. Ancient craftsmen controlled firing temperatures without thermometers. They produced durable ceramics without computerized kilns. They manufactured glass with consistent properties despite lacking modern chemical analysis. They created pigments capable of surviving centuries of burial. Today, scientists use electron microscopes, X-ray diffraction, and spectroscopic analysis to study these materials. Yet understanding a material's composition is not the same as understanding the practical knowledge used to create it. The formulas survive, but the expertise largely does not. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout archaeology. Among the most impressive Roman innovations was the hypocaust system. Evidence from Roman settlements across the empire indicates that heated air could be circulated beneath floors and through wall cavities to warm buildings. At first glance, this sounds relatively simple. In reality, it required extraordinary engineering. Builders had to calculate airflow paths, control temperatures, prevent structural damage, and maintain efficient fuel consumption. Modern computational fluid dynamics simulations have demonstrated that some Roman heating systems achieved surprisingly effective thermal distribution. The mystery is not whether the technology worked. The mystery is how generations of engineers optimized these systems without modern physics, modern mathematics, or advanced instrumentation. The people responsible for these designs understood heat movement through direct observation and accumulated experience. Much of that knowledge was never written down. Large cities require vast quantities of resources. Stone had to be quarried, timber had to be harvested, lime had to be produced, metals had to be transported, food had to support workers, everything had to arrive on schedule. Researchers studying Roman construction projects estimate that major urban developments could require tens of thousands of tons of material. At Iruna Valea, every wall, road, workshop, and public structure represents an enormous logistical achievement. Without trucks, cranes, railways, or engines, ancient builders coordinated supply networks across significant distances. Modern project managers rely on software to organize large construction operations. Roman administrators relied on experience, records, manpower, and organizational systems that remain only partially understood. The city itself proves their success. The methods behind that success remain largely invisible. What do you think? Were the builders of Iruna Valea simply applying standard Roman engineering? Or does the city preserve evidence of technological knowledge far more sophisticated than historians currently recognize? Share your thoughts in the comments below.